£12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us carry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10p, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12.60. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks ago.
How much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And, of course, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, always great to have your company. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Got so much to talk about today. There is an awful lot about. First up, though, I mean, the counter-terror police investigating the possibility that a hostile state may be behind the arson attacks against the Prime Minister. On Tuesday night, a 21-year-old man, as we were reporting yesterday, arrested on suspicion of targeting 2 properties and a car linked to Keir Starmer. He's been questioned by Scotland Yard's counter-terror command. They've not ruled out any motive, whether terror or any other motive at all, but he's still in police custody. We'll talk about that. Plus, Mayor of London Sadiq Khan has distanced himself, again, reported on the show yesterday, from what Keir Starmer said about the UK risking becoming an island of strangers because of mass immigration. The mayor saying those aren't words that he would use. He's claimed, though, rather controversially and completely incorrectly, as most of the stats used by the Mayor of London are about pretty much everything, that migrants contribute more than Brits do. Well, only if you play with the figures and, frankly, make them up, Sadiq. But there we are, we'll talk about that. Plus, the Royal College of Nursing has warned that the government's proposed crackdown on immigration is set to fuel an exodus, with thousands of migrant nursing staff ready to leave the UK. Again, I don't know why that would force them out. This bit, again, everyone's just making this stuff up, aren't they? Plus, Gary Lineker, yeah, our old friend Gaza. Gary has pleaded ignorance over an Instagram post attacking Israel, which included an anti-Semitic rat emoji, which has been prompted furious new calls for the BBC to sack him. Of course, he's already leaving in about a year. Anyway, the outgoing Match Today presenter says he failed to spot the image in a video he shared by the campaign group Palestine Lobby. Footage has now been deleted from Lineker's Instagram story. He's since deleted that post. But didn't he see it? Because it was really, really obvious. And didn't he know it was an anti-Semitic trope? He claims to know so much about this topic. Does he not? Anyway, we'll talk about all of that and plenty more besides. And I'd love to hear from you. Whatever the topic we're talking about, do get in touch. And I also want to talk about net zero. I know this is going to come as a surprise to everyone who's been listening to the show for years. Won't be cutting our energy bills. He was saying that. Well, not me. No, not me. No, not the energy lobby. No, British Gas. British Gas is telling us that. Maybe the boss of British Gas knows more than, I don't know. the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband? I don't know. But anyway, give us a call. 0344 499 1000 to have your say on any of our topics. You can get in touch by text on 87222. You can also get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. I'm normally reading out a specific question at this time, but actually there's just so many different topics around. I wanted to leave it open for you today. Also very open for conversation with my guest joining me in the studio, as she always does on a Wednesday, Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Government Advisor. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Looking very summery as well. Everyone's enjoying it. Everyone's enjoying it. It just makes such a difference every day. It's just like, wow, wouldn't we be a happy, lovely people?
Oh, yeah,
We'd be a very different country. I think there'd be less sarcasm. I think a lot less sarcasm in this country if we had sunny days. I think sarcasm is how we cope with the rain and the misery.
But as soon as it gets warm, if it goes to be too warm...
Well, it's too warm.
And it's too warm at night...
It's too warm. It just goes straight to too warm.
Because we're British and the weather is always going to be a topic of conversation. There will always be something wrong, so sarcasm reigns supreme.
Oh, right, no, it's always going to win. She has corrected me and she is right. But there we are. No, so much to talk about. Let's talk about these attacks on Keir Starmer's homes, because we first heard on Monday about this attack on... This looked like a firebomb attack, an arson attack on the home, his family home, the one we saw him clapping outside during lockdown, that he shared with his wife and children before he moved into number 11 Downing Street flat is where they live now. But it's apparently occupied, we understand, by his sister-in-law. We believed it was rented out, but his sister-in-law, whether he probably is charging a rent, isn't he, knowing him? So, yeah. Likes a freebie, doesn't he? But it was also a car. We understood a car and another property that we believe were linked to him. Turns out the car is a car he previously owned. He doesn't own it anymore. And the other attack on a flat was a flat he owned back in the 1990s. Now, we know a 21-year-old man is currently being investigated by counter-terrorism police at Scotland Yard and being questioned after being arrested in the early hours of Tuesday morning. But again, what is bizarre about this is the idea that they don't know what the motive is, but it could be someone acting on behalf of a hostile state who's behind the arson attacks. They say they've not ruled anything out, not ruled anything in. But it's quite bizarre that someone would have that information. I mean, about a car he previously owned, a flat he previously owned, putting that together. But obviously the knowledge that if you knew that, you would also know he doesn't live at this property anymore. In which case, what was the purpose? What was the motive of this? What do you make of it?
I don't buy into this being a hostile state act. It seems not quite well planned enough. I mean, I think if you're a 21-year-old, you're going to be quite internet savvy. You can look through images. I mean, I have many old cars in my name that if you went back far enough that you could probably locate around the country, and
people can do that.
It's not difficult.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely you can. So I don't buy this. I don't know what the motive is. I mean, it's quite interesting that...
And we have no idea whether this 21-year-old who's just a suspect is indeed
absolutely
responsible.
And we have to let that process be done. But it doesn't matter how much you disagree with a politician, you can't go around firebombing properties.
No, I mean, this is the thing. And again, we have had two MPs in recent years murdered from Labour and Tory, Joe Cox and David Amos, and absolutely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable, but it is a very, very, very strange investigation. I mean, any developments while we're on air, we'll certainly bring them to you. Can we also talk about where we are on migration, this immigration white paper that was announced on Monday, big speech by the Prime Minister, and basically what's happened is no one anywhere to the right of him, which is pretty much everybody, believes him when he says he's going to deal with immigration. And when the Home Secretary says, we're going to get it down by 100,000 a year, it's like, brilliant, what, from 728,000 where it was last year? I mean, no one believes him, no one thinks he's going to do it. No, even if he did do that, that still wouldn't be enough. So that's kind of discounted by everybody, I think, who were likely Tory or Reform voters, or just, disillusioned Labour voters. On the left, he's had huge criticism, John McDonnell, Zora Sultana, usual suspects, I think we can safely say, accusing him of echoing Enoch Powell. And we talked about that a lot yesterday. But Sadiq Khan, he said yesterday that he wouldn't use the same language when Keir Starmer had said, if we have mass immigration, we are basically risking becoming an island of strangers. But he says that's not the language he would use. That's him basically, I mean, it's basically criticising the Prime Minister. But he also made this ridiculous claim yesterday about how migrants contribute more to the UK economy than Brits. This is complete nonsense. This depends on it. So a migrant comes in, they're likely in their mid-20s or 30s. They're assuming, even your best case scenario, even those who have no dependents and who arrive at that age, unless they are earning more than 45k a year, they're not a net contributor. Yeah. Whereas, of course, Brits equally wouldn't be. But by the way, they're Brits, so they're already here. So I don't think that's how we judge people who are already here. But also, it doesn't include the fact that, you know, they bring dependents, that's not included, who'll go to school and need hospital appointments and the like, and you know, carry the NHS if they have more children. Doesn't include if they get leave to stay and then they claim a pension. Doesn't include any of that. But it does include, when you're comparing to the Brits, British people, the cost of the NHS when they're born and their education. The cohort of migrants is very different from the cohort of people already here, aged from 0 to 105. I mean, this is up there with his nonsense that he talks about pollution and how many, 30,000 people a year, but air pollution's killing in London a year or something. Again, utterly made up nonsense stats. He does this all the time, though.
He does, and if he thinks if he says it with enough conviction that people believe him. And I think somebody far cleverer than me worked out, based on the figures he gave yesterday, you would have to be earning 85,000 a year constantly,
which would put you in like top 5% earners by the long way,
in order to make his figures correct. And as
I think most of the people who are getting off at Luton Airport, or indeed those who arrive on those dinghies across,
then definitely.
Then I mean, obviously, because they're all rocket scientists and top brain surgeons, they probably are earning that. There you are, then. You see, sorry, Sadiq, you were right. There you are.
Said no one.
said literally no one. What annoys me is he puts out tweets and he doesn't allow any replies. Weirdly, because he follows me, I can reply. Usually,
he turns off
he doesn't. Yeah, he turns off comments. But what doesn't matter, whatever it is, no matter how benign the message is. And then when you say, like, you know, even a message about VE Day, no replies allowed. And then people say, oh, it's because he gets all this abuse. Actually, yeah, he does get some racist abuse. Yeah. Well, like I get called the C word and the B word, and I mean, I get called, you know, a baby killer at most days on Twitter. But it doesn't mean I stop, you know, people replying to me. I'd like to know the people who are that insane, frankly. And it's awful that he should ever get any racist abuse. It's absolutely awful and totally untenable. And I think you can criticise people without at any point managing to bring up their religion or their skin colour. I think it's utterly bizarre that people do that, and heinous and awful. But most of the criticism, most of the replies, they're not racist abuse. They're telling him they think he's useless. You're allowed to tell a politician you think they're useless. That is a key part of democracy.
Well, of course it is.
Especially if they're useless.
You're completely entitled to your opinion, just as the same way that he would be completely entitled to ignore it, which is what he should do.
Yeah.
Don't be so thin-skinned. If you are putting yourself out there as the Mayor of London, giving all of this information out there, you should be able to have some in return.
Absolutely. It really is outrageous. What do you make of the survey by the Royal College of Nursing of 3,000 migrant nurses found that more than 4 in 10 who've been internationally educated were planning to leave the country. They said 70% of it was as a result of pay. Others said, 40% said it was the immigration policy. So they're saying there'll be an exodus of nurses as a result of immigration policy. But they're people who are already here. This is like the same argument over Brexit. But all these people will leave. No, everyone's allowed to stay. I mean, like 5 million EU citizens stayed in the UK. By the way, 2 million more than we thought were actually here. Small point worth making. Genuinely, the officials didn't know there were that many people in the country from the EU. That's how rubbish our government is, of all political hues. And they're already here. No one's going to force them to leave if they're working as nurses.
No.
Where have they got this from?
I don't know.
Just make this stuff up.
The thing is, I've heard this before. During my time at the Home Office, any time we made any amendments to the immigration rules, immigration health surcharge, whatever it was, we would be warned that 60%, 70%, 30%, you know, whichever number they chose at the time, would leave the country. Yeah. It doesn't work like that. I think people are just asking a binary question. Do you think the immigration policies are good? yes, no, would you leave?
But also,
Doesn't
it's like
affect
those surveys, anyone, pretty much any job, whatever it is, whether it's teachers, nurses or whatever, you know, are you looking to leave your job because you're fed up? Yes. Basically, at least 1 in 4 of everybody in pretty much every job,
of course,
is planning to leave, well, talking about planning to leave in the next couple of years because they're miserable.
And if you've had a particularly bad day in that survey lands, then that's going to skew your answers. So I don't believe it for a second.
I wouldn't give my colleagues the satisfaction.
You've got great colleagues. I just have to say that to you. You really do.
You know what? We've got a fantastic team. Well, as I say, I mentioned them actually. They did start a swear jar this morning.
Someone's going to be rich.
I'm trying to work out whether it's for charity or someone's holiday budget. But yeah, I think within 5 minutes I was 25 quid down. I get it all out of my system off air.
Exactly.
It's much easier that way.
It's quite stunning, though.
Also, when we talk about some subjects, I just find it extraordinary, as Mike says, how we don't swear on air. This extraordinary story about Peter Sullivan. Now, this isn't a case I knew of at all. We've had a number of different cases where we've had convictions that have been quashed. This is a man who is currently 68 years old. He's sitting at the appeal court yesterday where they announced that basically his conviction back. I mean, it's just extraordinary. 38 years ago was incorrect.
Yeah.
There was DNA sample found at the crime scene of the horrific murder by being beaten to death of 21-year-old Diane Sindel, and it suggested that it was him. Now the DNA profile, they've been re-examined it, new evidence that it couldn't have been him, and that actually points to an unknown attacker. Now, look, very, very, very difficult for the family of Diane Sindel. They now don't know who murdered their daughter, and this person, likely a man, has been on the streets all this time. Having been a convicted murderer, goodness knows what. But this comes after the case of Andrew Malkinson. He was cleared of rape in 2023 when DNA identified another suspect. He spent 17 years behind bars. Peter Sullivan has spent 38 years behind bars. He's believed to be the longest-serving victim of miscarriage of justice. But the first evidence that suggested that he wasn't guilty, he always protested his innocence, was in 2015.
Yeah.
2015. And we've had this issue, and we've had the same, it was definitely the same thing with Andrew Malkinson, which is that the Criminal Cases Review Board and all the other bodies involved, they are incredibly slow at getting to these cases, at dealing with them. And you know, even like a year or so ago, they were like, oh yeah, you know, I'm sorry, these things should be... I mean, they should be absolute top priority. And he's talked about how he's been stripped of his youth. He's lost 30 years. He's like, look, I'm an atheist. You're only here once. This is it. This is all you get. He's had basically, best case scenario, a third of his life stolen from him.
And one of the most amazing things is the comment that he made, that he was not angry and he wasn't bitter.
How?
I would be absolutely fuming about this, especially for the last 10 years. There has been some question as to whether his conviction would hold up. So what have they been doing in that intervening 10 years? I would be really angry. I don't see how anybody cannot be.
And by the way, this is why I don't support the death penalty.
Exactly that. 38 years.
You can't free a man who's been hanged.
And this is not an unusual case, as you say. There's been a couple of people who were found innocent.
Indeed. I really want to slip in one more topic before we get to the break, but net zero will not bring down electricity prices. The boss of British Gas has said this. We've also got, latest mad plot from Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary and Net Zero Secretary, for people to, because they can't afford to get a heat pump because it costs too much. Most people can't afford a new boiler. They're about £3.5 grand. Heat pumps, but they say they're £5.5 grand. No, they're not. There's loads of extra work that needs to be done around. They often end up costing about 10 when you have all the work done. Digging up the garden, if you've got a garden, lucky you. Basically, he's talking about people doing a salary sacrifice scheme, so you just take less salary in return for which you can pay towards the cost of your heat pump. No one wants the heat. No one wants them. But this idea that we've been told we're going to bring down prices for energy bills. It's not. British Gas are really clear. Net zero, even if we achieved it, which we won't, even if it was, we won't. Not desirable. It's not. It won't bring down prices. Why are we doing it?
I was looking at some of the reasons why the bills, our energy bills, are so high, and it includes things like we pay for carbon taxes.
Yeah.
We pay for insulation schemes, whether we have them or not. Renewable subsidies. And then there's also my favourite, the constraint payments.
Yeah, because we're constantly told that the reason why energy bills are so high and our electricity bills in particular are so high is because of international gas prices. And it's not. Actually, the extra increase in our energy costs is direct on the bill is directly down to all of these subsidies for renewables. And I don't know why we have to subsidise renewables, because they're so much cheaper than fossil fuels. We keep being told.
No, we do, but apart from the fact that we had to pay £1 billion last year to wind farms in order to turn the turbines off because the grid couldn't cope. It's £1 billion worth of money.
I mean, it's not like we're short cash. We've got plenty of money. Everything's paid for and everything's fine. We can afford these things, Claire.
Well, I must be living in a completely different world to Ed Miliband when you have to turn off the wind turbines and when the sun isn't shining, you don't get solar power.
Can I just say, everyone lives in a different world from Ed Miliband.
Quite glad about that.
I'm pretty sure that we all do. Hi, Ed. Anyway, at 10:20 time, I want to hear from you, and whatever we're talking about, give us a call, 0344 499 1000, text on 87222, get in touch at talkTV on X. Up next, we are going to be talking about those firebomb attacks on properties belonging to the Prime Minister. Is it down to a hostile state? And is Israel basically starving the civilians of Gaza? Well, we'll talk to Andrew Fox about both those stories. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
The point I was making is, if you come illegally and don't get deported, people will keep coming.
Yeah.
And the bar to deportation, the thing that stopped the Conservatives' Rwanda plan from working, was, of course, if you remember, the intervention at 10 o'clock at night of a judge in Strasbourg in the European Court of Human Rights, the incorporation of that law into the 1998 Human Rights Act. And British judges, I mean, we've even seen someone not deported because his kid liked chicken nuggets.
I know.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:24 is the time. Claire Pistol still with me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's go to our next guest, a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, Andrew Fox, who joins us to talk about all things domestic and international. Very good morning to you, Andrew.
Good morning, Julia.
First of all, let's talk about where we are at home, because this very big concerning story involving the firebomb attacks, the arson attacks on properties belonging to the Prime Minister, or now or in the past. Not just the property he had as a family home in North London before he moved to Downing Street with his family, but also a flat he owned back in the 90s, a car he previously owned. A 21-year-old man is in custody. We know counter-terrorism police are involved in interrogations. We understand that they are looking at possibly whether agents from a hostile nation state could actually be involved. What do you make of this investigation?
When looking at the initial evidence that's in the public domain, first of all, the age of the suspects jumps out to me. I think it would be unusual for a sophisticated state actor to be just 21 years old. Also, these groups tend to work in teams, as we saw recently with the Iranian arrests. If you think about the team that went to Salisbury to do the poisonings there from Russia.
Yeah.
They do tend to work in teams rather than lone wolves. And then there's the fact that the targets have obviously been selected by Google using old and out-of-date information, so not particularly up-to-date stuff. You'd think a state actor would be better organised than that.
But and also they would know, surely, whoever it was would know that Keir Starmer doesn't live at that address in North London anymore.
Yeah, of course. And then, of course, arson is not a particularly good way of targeting someone. It's a very untargeted crime. So it seems to me that this is an attempt to damage Mr. Starmer's property and threaten him and his family. It seems to me this is far more likely to be a lone wolf than an organised state actor at this point. But then more information might come out.
Well, indeed. And again, of course, we don't know whether this 21-year-old man who's been arrested is indeed going to be charged, or whether he's completely innocent. Obviously, certainly no charges to date. Can we also talk about international affairs? You and I often talk about what's going on, whether it's Ukraine or Israel or Gaza. Of course, we've got talks could be taking place tomorrow in Ukraine with Zelensky. We know he's going to be there. Whether or not Putin turns up, who knows if Trump turns up. We've also got ongoing issues in Gaza. Now, Israel has been accused of basically denying food to Gaza as a weapon of war. This is what a UN Palestinian Refugee Agency has told the BBC. We interestingly had an extraordinary exchange on the Radio 4 this morning between Nick Robinson and a representative of the Israeli government, where Nick Robinson basically refused to use the term, that Hamas was a terrorist organisation, something that BBC will never do, and talking about how the Israeli representative was basically delivering propaganda on the show. And yet, of course, the BBC news report after news report fails to mention that pretty much all the information they get out of Gaza comes from Hamas terrorist-controlled information sources. What do you make of the claim that Israel is basically completely against all international law and all, rules of war, using starvation as a weapon of war against the people of Gaza?
Well, there's a very clear clause in international law that says that you don't have to provide aid if it goes to your enemy, and there is ample evidence to show that Hamas has been seizing the aid, from videos of gunmen taking aid trucks through to a video they posted this week of themselves having a firefight with the IDF in an aid warehouse. So this is pretty clear cut and dried. And we also know from not only COGAT, which is the humanitarian coordination agency that Israel uses in the Gaza Strip, but also from the UN's own figures, we know that somewhere between 5 and 8 months worth of food went into Gaza during the ceasefire. So if there is a food shortage in Gaza, and bearing in mind for months, or since the start of the war, they've been trying to declare famine in Gaza, and we still haven't seen any deaths due to starvation or minimal malnutrition.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I can certainly remember at least a year I've listened to reports on the TV and radio telling me that up to half of the Gazan population is at risk of dying of famine.
Yeah, and from the ceasefire videos we saw coming out of Gaza, from every video, everyone looks pretty well fed, if not chubby. We know that Gaza had an obesity problem before the war started. I mean, I think, will some people be suffering? Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Will some people be finding it difficult to get the quality of food that they got before the war? Absolutely, 100%. But the bottom line is, the food is in there. If Gazan civilians aren't getting it, that's probably Hamas's fault rather than Israel's, I would suggest.
And this is something you say that's well documented and does seem to always be ignored. But again, Israel said the amount of food that went in is enough, certainly, to last to the summer. This is the thing, because I can't recall any war when we've been involved in, or Americans or any other Western nation, where we've been expected to supply the enemy. And people will say, though, that, well, the Palestinian people aren't the enemy, it's Hamas. What would you say to that?
Well, the stopping of aid is not Gaza, it's to deny it to Hamas, who are well documented to have seized that food and that humanitarian aid. And I think we can, make a fair criticism of Israel and say that their strategy has been flawed in that they've left the humanitarian aid to be distributed by UN agencies and thereby seized by Hamas. Actually, this war may have been shorter if they had taken control of the humanitarian aid right from the start, because it would have denied Hamas that source of income and that way of controlling Gaza's population. So I think we can point to a very obvious flaw in Israeli strategy here. But it is also worth pointing out that they are in the process of setting up humanitarian zones in the south of Gaza, in the area they control, where they're going to invite Gazan civilians in to be fed away from Hamas. Yeah. So they are sort of rectifying.
But we have seen again and again when the humanitarian zones are set up that Hamas will actually send their fighters, send their terrorist leaders, and also hidden, and we know this is well documented, hidden hostages among those in these, not just in the humanitarian zones, but of course in hospitals and other civilian civilian areas which they deliberately do, which again is also against the rules of war.
Yeah, and my paper that came out last week through the Henry Jackson Society goes into huge detail on this. We've gone through the open source evidence, and it's absolutely incontrovertible. It's concrete evidence, well beyond reasonable doubt, that Hamas do all of these things, and yet they've been given a completely free pass by the UN and huge chunks of the world's media.
Well, exactly. I mean, you point out in that report for the Henry Jackson Society about the human shield strategy in Gaza, and that again and again we see reports. The BBC is the worst offender by far, where they talk about 50. Was it not the latest report? 52 people dead after an attack on a hospital. It's claimed by Israel that they were targeting X or Y terrorists. Invariably, Hamas confirmed that these 10 leaders, my goodness me, Hamas have got a lot of leaders, have been confirmed dead, and this was the attack in which they died, and yet no one at the BBC seems to ever acknowledge, well, yeah, so they did have Hamas fighters at this civilian complex or at this hospital, and it was a legitimate target. And bearing in mind that Israel invariably informs civilians in advance, literally sends text messages, drops leaflets to say, please get out, we're going to target this facility.
Yes, and we saw a great example from the BBC yesterday, where they declared that Israel had struck a hospital, when in fact it was the grounds outside a hospital, and the target was Mohammed Sinwar, who is the leader of Hamas since his brother died.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fairly critical piece of information when you're reporting on that particular airstrike, and yet that was completely omitted from BBC World's online headlines. And there's a case that Israel hasn't really fought the information war for the last 20 months. But on the flip side, if that's the quality of reporting they're facing, I can see why they've said, well, world media, we're just going to ignore you and do what we have to do to keep our country safe, and your reporting can...
What did you make this morning of Nick Robinson, who's a journalist I've actually got a lot of time for, and very respectful of, and very much like as a person? When he basically accused the Israeli government spokesperson of basically just delivering used the word propaganda, not something he'd said to the aid agency representative, certainly. And then when the response came from the Israeli representative, why don't you, I'll give you this opportunity, why don't you, I challenge you to say that Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and Nick Robinson refused to do so. What do you make of that?
I think it's culturally entrenched in the BBC now. There's such groupthink around this. There's so much kind of mutually supporting bad reporting that they just think they're in the right and Israel's in the wrong at this point. And unfortunately, you have to look at this dispassionately as an analyst. And it is an incredibly upsetting thing to have to look at, the state of Gaza and the fact that so many civilians have been killed.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to take that emotional step back and do the analysis in a cold, calculated way.
And remember, it's something you've talked about an awful lot, which is in terms of the stats, in terms of civilian deaths, and every civilian death is an absolute tragedy. No one is saying it's a good thing or it's an okay thing. It's an absolute tragedy. But in terms of war, in terms of wars that we have fought, America has fought, our other allies have fought, wars we fought against, organisations like Al Qaeda and ISIS, the ratio of civilian deaths to combatant deaths is off the scale good. I mean, every death's sad and awful, but is way better. I mean, by magnitudes better than anything we've ever achieved.
Yeah, and all the supporting stats go around that as well. They've dropped between 75,000 and 100,000 tons of munitions on Gaza. And people talk about that being worse than Hiroshima. That's 8 Hiroshimas. But actually, the casualties in total, including combatants, are less than a quarter of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. So the fact they've dropped so much ammunition compared with so few casualties means one of two things. They're either the worst shots in history, or they're taking tremendous care with civilian lives. It's one or the other, and I don't think they're bad shots. So
yeah, very good point. Andrew Fox, always so good to talk to you to get your analysis. Research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you very much indeed. Claire Pearce, you're listening to that. What do you want to say?
I think it's a really interesting view, and Andrew's is quite correct when you look at the propaganda war coming out of Hamas, a terrorist organisation, putting out their own information that we have to accept on face value as being true.
Yeah, and even when they're proved again and again to have lied.
Absolutely, but what else have we got? Because international journalists aren't allowed in, you cannot have any other verifications.
I just don't think it'd be safe for international journalists.
No, I don't think it will, but you get that kind of void then of you have to rely upon a terrorist.
But I do find it extraordinary when many news organisations will take at face value what terrorist, murderous, rapist, baby killing, torturing, and hostage-taking terrorist organisation will say at face value, even though there's blatant evidence showing that's not true, and have been proven to lie again and again and again over what I don't trust what any government says automatically. Show me the evidence. When Hamas show us the evidence, it's nearly always concocted. I mean, undoubtedly there are civilian deaths. Those civilian deaths are the fault of Hamas, not of Israel, and it's a very, very simple thing. If you want there to be an end to civilian deaths in Gaza, give the hostages back and stop firing rockets at your neighbours. It's really simple. 10:36 is the time. Up next, we're going to talk to Mark Littlewood about all things politics back at home, including Sadiq Khan on Labour's backlash over Starmer's apparently Enoch Powell speech on immigration. This is Talk, Home and Common Sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Don't forget to put your calls in 0344 499 1000, your thoughts on all of the topics we are talking about. Indeed, your reaction to what my next guest has to say. Mark Littlewood is Director of Popular Conservatism and joins us as he does regularly. A very good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get straight to it, because normally we don't have a guest in the last sections. We've run a little bit over, but I want to ask you in particular about this big speech on immigration for the Prime Minister on Monday. Might well come up at PMQs today with Kemi Badenoch, who knows? But Sadiq Khan and various Welsh Labour leader and others being rather sort of, oh, nothing to do with us, Gov, distancing themselves, criticism from the left. A lot of criticism from the right that what he's promising, they don't believe he'll do it, and even if he did, it wouldn't be enough. But Sadiq Khan has basically said, he wouldn't have used the language, the island of strangers risk that Keir Starmer has done. He's also claimed that migrants coming to this country contribute more than Brits. What do you make of that?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? The biggest error in comparing Keir Starmer's speech with Enoch Powell's speech is that Enoch Powell actually believed what he was saying. Whether you approved of it or not is a different thing. I think Keir Starmer was saying this entirely through gritted teeth. Sadiq Khan and others are unbelievably oversensitive if they find the term island of strangers or racist. I mean, that's a very rather soft way of putting things, I think, in certain circumstances. So I suspect that the Welsh Labour leader, the Mayor of London and various others are probably representing the true face of what Labour thinks about immigration. The Prime Minister has pivoted so dramatically, not because he has had a Damascene conversion to actually controlling our borders in a serious way, but because he can read the opinion polls and how ballots were cast on May the 1st. Yeah. So you could almost hear his teeth gritting as he was speaking just the other day. And it seems to me that if you've got a government who are reluctantly addressing this issue and this problem, they're extremely unlikely to be using the tools that are actually needed to get this problem under control.
Yeah, indeed. And it's fascinating also, the Mayor of London, speaking yesterday, he said, and then he tweeted out, posted, whatever we're saying these days, generations of migrants have helped contribute to London's success economically, socially and culturally. He said, thank you for what you've done and continue to do to make London the greatest city in the world. And he said that, migrants, a lot of people say, oh, migrants have built this country. I mean, I'm not saying that migrants haven't made a contribution, but the reason why migrants wanted to come to this country is because of what Brits built. I mean, democracy, the rule of law, our values in terms of equality and freedom, liberty, freedom of speech, such as we still have, women getting the right to vote, all these things. They weren't delivered to us, the Industrial Revolution. These weren't delivered to us by people who arrived on our shore. They were developed and came about over years and years, decades, sometimes even centuries, from what British people themselves did and fought for and worked towards. And people wanted to come to this country and make it their home because of those things that were built. I'm getting really fed up with this nonsense that we are a nation of immigrants. We're not. America is. We're not. And that we were built by migrants. I'm not being critical of migrants. I mean, I'm from half Irish immigrant stock. I'm not in any way saying that. But it's an absolute nonsense lie that politicians claim.
Yeah, that's right. I think the other thing here, if you were looking to excuse that sort of language, which, like you, Julia, are not, this pretense that it's only immigrants who have built all the important things in Britain is farcical. But the other thing that's so dramatic here, and one of the reasons I've become tougher on immigration, is the cohort and nature of people entering the country has dramatically changed. Yeah. The sort of people who are coming in now are more numerous and have different characteristics to the sort of people who are coming in the 60s and 70s, right? So we've got vast numbers coming in, net migration of 750,000 a year. That will probably fall somewhat, but it's still colossal.
It'll be over 500,000. No matter what, it'll be over 500,000. That's what the Home Office is working on.
And by and large, I mean, generalisation klaxon, but nevertheless, by and large, these people are not net contributors to the Exchequer. They are net beneficiaries. I think in the last cohort, the estimate was only 16% of them were going into the workforce. And a good number of those who go into the workforce will be going in at relatively low-paid jobs and making quite high demands on the welfare state. So it's very difficult to look at this cohort as a whole and say, wow, look at the contribution. This is not also just Premier League footballers and brain surgeons, right?
Well, as we always say, but you'd only have to look at the last 20 years. We've had mass immigration. We've gone from net migration of 20 or 30 max a year 30,000 max a year, to then booming up, way over 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. But now, in the 2 years ago, it was over 900,000. Again, that's net. That means like 1.2 million people came here from abroad and 300,000 left. Some of those were Brits. Some of them might have been our brightest and best who would have liked to have kept here. Thank you very much. But in all that time, we have seen no increase in productivity, certainly not in the public sector, no increase in our economy. We've been in an economic slump. The idea that this has brought great untold riches is abject nonsense.
Yeah. And the thing you missed out of your list is an explosion in welfare spending, Julia, right? That's the other thing that we've witnessed. So you said at the just a few minutes ago that sort of back in the day, perhaps the great attraction to people considering coming to the United Kingdom was our great history, freedom of speech, the rule of law, great economic opportunities. Now I fear one of the great magnets is that we have an incredibly soft asylum system.
Yeah.
It's extremely easy to slip into the black market economy. And even if you remain in the official economy, it's extremely easy to claim extraordinary generous welfare. If that's your magnet, you've got a problem.
I want to get to a couple of other topics very quickly before we go to a break. But can I ask you about net zero? Because it's absolutely fascinating. The British gas boss has said, turns out net zero policies, if we reach them, won't deliver cheaper electricity or other energy bills. Are you surprised?
Yeah, who knew? Who knew? I mean, I think relatively sensible people have been saying this for years.
Well, people who can count.
The energy industry has sort of sat on the fence as being neither one thing nor the other. In fairness to them, they've been mucked around so much by successive governments because rules and laws and taxes around energy seem to change on an almost daily basis. It's one sector of our economy where it's damn near impossible to plan anything over the long term. But I think if you've now got people of this seniority in the energy sector calling it out, then net zero is on the way to the dust.
Bye-bye. Absolutely.
Not a day too soon.
Indeed.
Ludicrous, mad, manic project.
What else might be on its way out? Brexit, because we know next Monday we've got this EU summit, and certainly from what Pat McFadden, one of the Prime Minister's henchmen, had to say on radio this morning, doing a media round, talking about the possibility of this deal with the EU, again, this possibility of, let's face it, call it what it is, free movement for under 30s. Bringing it back by the back door, but trying to do some sort of trade deal which might have lots of different facets, which could make a proper deal on paper with America hard, and indeed even damage our trade with China, again another big trading partner. Or do you think we're just going to have a complete sellout of Brexit just because we know that we've got the Ramona-in-Chief in charge at number 10 now?
Yeah, I mean, this already looks like a partial sellout. I wouldn't call it a complete sellout at this stage. And look, we want good trading relations with the EU, obviously, right? So if we can knock that into better shape year on year, keep going back to the negotiating table, make it easier to buy their products and to sell them products and services, fantastic. The big thing that we should be looking at here, though, Julia, in all the text of this, is what's called in the lingo dynamic alignment.
Yep.
This would mean if the EU changes its rules about whatever, the curvature of fruit or the size of a Mars bar or what you can call a chocolate bar, that we would be obliged to follow. And to my mind, if we became a rule taker again from the European Union, such that if they do something over in Brussels, it automatically applies here, that is a big sellout of Brexit. And as you rightly say, makes negotiating deals with other parts of the world about our regulatory framework damn near impossible. So that's the thing to keep a beady eye on. If you hear the words dynamic alignment, the sellout is happening.
That's the giveaway, isn't it? Mark Littlewood, thank you very much indeed, Director of Public Conservatism. Claire Pearsall's response to that?
Oh, I love the conversations about Brexit because the sensible people among us can see exactly what is happening, and it's always good to have that laid out in front of us. But I also think Mark was spot on when he said that Starmer doesn't actually believe what he says. Anything. Definitely in that speech, you could see that he was almost being prodded in the back by someone to keep talking.
And again, so what's the point? You just upset the left and the right don't believe you anyway.
Yeah.
Absolute waste of time, the whole thing. Absolute waste of time.
Irritated everybody equally.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, funny that. I mean, Mike Graham's theory is that actually they're trying to do this to undermine him, to start to oust him. Who do they think is going to come in? It's the Labour Party. It'll be someone even more left-wing. Anyway, 10:48 time. We're going to take a break. Again, always love to hear from you on all the big topics. 0344 499 1000. We've got some of your texts and tweets coming in as well. But we're going to be talking about the BBC being urged once again to sack Gary Lineker after, frankly, an outrageous anti-Semitic trope on an Instagram post that he said apparently feigns ignorance about. But when you post that much about anti-Israel stuff in your social media, maybe you should know a little bit more about it, Gaza. We'll talk about that up next with Rebecca Ryan. This is Talk.
The point I was making is, if you come illegally and don't get deported, people will keep coming.
Yeah.
And the bar to deportation, the thing that stopped the Conservatives' Rwanda plan from working, was, of course, if you remember, the intervention at 10 o'clock at night of a judge in Strasbourg in the European Court of Human Rights, the incorporation of that law into the 1998 Human Rights Act. And British judges, I mean, we've even seen someone not deported because his kid liked chicken nuggets.
I know.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:52 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk. And let's talk about the BBC, one of our favourite topics. And when we talk about BBC, it inevitably often seems to involve Gary Lineker as well. Well, let's talk about this with Rebecca Ryan, who's campaign director at Defund the BBC. Very good morning to you.
Julia.
You'll know from many, many times that you and I have spoken, I'm not actually defund the BBC. I just want the BBC to just do its job properly and go back to a few more basics rather than be this basic multinational corporation that it tries to be. But every time they come up as a topic, I've got to be honest with you, my willingness to back the BBC in existing at all gets a little bit harder, quite apart from their outrageous coverage of everything that happens in Gaza and anti-Israeli propaganda on a daily basis. I find extraordinary. But Gary Lineker, one of the worst offenders on this, he, of course, is already leaving as the Match of Day presenter. I'm very happy for him to stay as the Match of the Day presenter. I think he's a really good football pundit. He's just terrible on political analysis. He's in trouble yet again after he posted some content on Instagram. It's called an Instagram story. And it's basically from a campaign group called Palestine Lobby. They're not not Palestine lobby, they're an anti-Israel body. And they posted a video which he put forward, which has a rat emoji on the whole way through. Now, the rat emoji is a clear anti-Semitic trope, which Gary Lineker, who claims ignorance, and when people complained about this, deleted this particular post. He claims he didn't realise that. And yet this is a topic he writes about and talks about all the time on social media and in interviews, and yet apparently hasn't done any research whatsoever to look into anti-Semitic tropes, which he seems to keep accidentally pushing. What do you make of that?
I think it's really outrageous, isn't it? And the thing is, it was only 2 weeks ago when the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, was saying that, you know, this culture of the untouchables would be coming to an end. And so, you know, Gary Lineker should have this fresh in his mind. And as you know, and I know, anyone who's sort of involved and followed this sort of Palestine-Israel debate on social media, it's full of all of this, you know, vile tropes. And Gary Lineker better. The thing is that the BBC is obliged to deliver journalistic excellence as part of its charter, as how it's able to tax the British people with fee. It has to deliver journalism, and he should know. And he can pretend he doesn't know, but he should know.
But exactly, and lots of people wouldn't know. They wouldn't realise that. But again, he often says, oh, I don't know much about it. Well, if you don't know much about it, maybe stop putting your tuppence worth in, because maybe there's a reason why you're not the political editor of the BBC and why you're a football pundit, because you don't actually know enough about this topic. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe he's just watching the BBC output, and therefore he probably does think that Israel is entirely in the wrong and not those terrorists who came and massacred people and raped people and murdered people and tortured people and have taken hostages and still holding hostages and still bombing innocent people in Israel and using innocent civilians in Gaza as a human shield. I mean, maybe he doesn't know that. It's always possible.
I mean, it is possible, but as you've said, you know, this is an issue that I think you'd have to be living in a cave to not realise how heated and divisive this issue is. And working for the BBC, he should know that you can't wade into something like this and starts, you know, retweeting and liking things from either side of the argument.
Yeah. Just steer clear. It's so easy. I mean, he'll say, like, he first got involved when we were talking about Syrian refugees. Remember, he said you take a refugee in, and then I think it took about 5 years for him to actually take one in. But it's very interesting. He was very critical of Suella Braverman in a reply to someone's post a couple of years ago when she was Home Secretary, and talked about how this is the language is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. And here he is, retweeting an anti-Semitic trope. And I pointed out yesterday, some might say that's an image that's not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. I mean, you know, two can play at that game, Gary. The main issue is he's a great football pundit. He knows about football. He appears to know far too little about this topic. And I don't mind him having a different view from me, but he's so ill-informed. And if he either doesn't know, don't argue, don't talk about this topic, or if he does know, then he is now in a very nasty anti-Semitic world.
Absolutely, and he's waded, you know, in the best case scenario, he's waded into it as a sort of innocent and who's just sort of bumbling around. But the danger with that is, if that is the case, that he's creating a really dangerous atmosphere for the Jewish community in this country, but also globally.
Absolutely. I'm sure Tim Davie, the BBC DG, was absolutely delighted. He's giving a major statement, big speech today. I'm sure he was thrilled to have Gary Lineker back in the news.
Absolutely, but he's the gift that keeps giving, isn't he? Certainly to defund the BBC. But, you know, the thing is, when we've had them talking about these untouchables, you know, they've spent millions on these internal reviews that they do where they sort of work out their own homework, and they come out saying, oh, well, there are these untouchables and we have to put an end to this. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, here we are again. Nothing changes.
Exactly. And he does seem to think he's untouchable. He says he kind of didn't want to go, they wanted him to go. But again, he is a problem. Or he could just stop talking about stuff he doesn't know about and just do the football punditry, and we'd all be happy. Rebecca Ryan, Campaign Director from the BBC, thank you very much indeed. Claire, where are you on this?
That he should stick to football, keep out of politics.
He's entitled to have a public opinion.
Yes, he is. But he also then needs to back that up. And he retweeted that. He posted that particular offensive image up there and then claimed, oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't realise. That's not an excuse. If you're going to put something out there on a platform with the kind of reach you have, you need to be responsible.
I mean, and that is the key thing. You do absolutely need to be responsible, especially with, I know, so many Jewish people in this country fearful for their own safety on a daily basis, and something we talk about regularly on this show. Again, a lot of people say he's got freedom of speech, he can say what he wants. Well, you also have a work contract, and it used to be very clear, and certainly most people within the BBC were of the view that, yes, just because, political editors and stuff can't give their political views, political staff and news staff, obviously, but actually the view was if you were highly linked to the BBC, that, yes, you shouldn't give your views on these things, or not on controversial matters.
But I think the BBC have also shown that they don't take it very seriously when it comes to Gary Lineker. He's managed to get away with it for so long.
It's because they agree with him.
Yes,
if he was giving his views supporting Israel, I can assure you he'd have been long gone. If he was talking about how we need to limit immigration instead of come on in, welcome everyone, come and stay at my place, I can assure you he would have been long gone. And that's the difference, because when they say they want neutral political opinion or no political opinion, what they mean is their political opinion, which is a very different thing. I'd love to know what you think about this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips in Leeds, it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us curry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10p, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12 and 60p. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks ago.
How much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 11. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, thank you so much for joining us. Big thank you also to Claire Pitzel, former Conservative Government Advisor. She worked in the Home Office. Boo! Is with us, but she was one of the sane ones trying to get stuff done. We like her. Honestly, we do. Anyway, she's with me all the way till 1 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, a man jailed for life for murder saw his conviction quashed at the appeal court yesterday after fresh testing of samples at the crime scene found a DNA profile that exonerated him and pointed to an unknown attacker. Peter Sullivan spent 38 years behind bars. He's described the pain of being stripped of his youth, but says he's not bitter. How? After being jailed for life at the age of 30 for the murder of Diane Sindel. He is believed to be the UK's longest-serving victim of a miscarriage of justice. We'll be talking about that in this hour. Plus, under government plans to tackle the overcrowding crisis, prisoners will be released from jail as little as a third of the way through their sentences if they behave well. I mean, yeah, don't stab anyone, throw boiling water or boiling oil on them, and you basically serve a third of your sentence. Why do we even bother? Let's not even bother arresting people anymore. It's an absolute waste of time. Meanwhile, President Trump, on his trip to the Middle East, has hailed a golden age for the Middle East as he urged nations in the region to abandon conflict and embrace prosperity in partnership with the US. No doubt also with the Trump Organization building towers and hotels. He said this was led by the example of his hosts in Saudi Arabia. Again, everyone's still pretending the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is a reformist and a modernist, when in fact he's a murderous dictator. The US president will go to meet another murderous dictator. He'll be meeting with the new leader of Syria. That's Ahmed al-Shara, the former al-Qaeda member and militant Islamist who has taken over from Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We are in very strange territory because President Trump really doesn't seem to know what is and what is not a murderous dictator. He's very, very confused and seems to think Zelensky is one when he's pretty much the only person he's dealt with who isn't. It's not that, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, but it's quite bizarre. Clemens, I mean, before we talk, it's got lots of things to talk about, but in terms of Donald Trump over in the Middle East, talk of him possibly going to Turkey, to Istanbul, where there is going to be apparently possibility of peace talks going on. Zelensky is going to fly tomorrow from Ukraine to Istanbul, and basically, I'm guessing, sitting in an empty room with another spare chair. Maybe they'll get a big white table, so it'll be something that Vladimir Putin will feel comfortable with. And basically, I'm going to wait for Vladimir Putin to come. We don't know if he's going to come or not, but we've got an awful lot on President Trump's plate as basically the man who's the most powerful man in the world and governing the world's policeman. But Ukraine, Middle East, do you think he's got his priorities right?
Yes, I do in this respect. Now, I'm not always in favour of everything that Donald Trump does, but I do think in this it does help the US. If you sort out situations, wars in the Middle East, war in Ukraine, it does help the American economy, and obviously on the world stage it helps out the rest of us too. Interesting that he is there front and centre in Riyadh. He is talking to Zelensky, he is probably talking to Putin should he turn up, and he's talking to Ahmed al-Shara, the Syrian leader. We're not. Yeah. Where is our Prime Minister in all of this? So actually, I think that Donald Trump is doing
busy selling out to the EU.
Yeah. Which looks like an irrelevant...
We're busy smashing the gangs, Claire.
Yeah, because that's worked really, really well. How many did we have this weekend that came in by boat? Quite a few.
500. I think we had 200 while Keir Starmer was speaking.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's not working out so well. So at the moment, I would suggest that Donald Trump has done more in his 100-odd days than Keir Starmer could ever dream of.
That is interesting. I wonder if we will see, any move to, cease war in Gaza or indeed in Ukraine. It's very interesting that Donald Trump is not going to visit Israel, despite, we understand, a request from Netanyahu. And the bromance between Netanyahu and Trump was the thing. There was no love lost between Biden and Netanyahu. And yet, it is quite bizarre that he's chosen not to visit at this time. Let's talk about, how this may or may not link to where we are right now with this investigation into arson attacks on not just the current Prime Minister's home, family home he lived before he moved into number 10, a former flat he owned in the 90s, and a car he used to own. All three attacked over a period of days. A 21-year-old man has been arrested as a suspect in those arson attacks, being questioned by the counter-terrorism police since the early hours of Tuesday morning. We haven't got any developments on that yet. All we do know, though, is that counter-terror police are looking at the possibility that a hostile state may be behind the arson attacks. Now, you'd think then China, Russia, Iran... Anyone else?
There's probably quite a few that we could lump into that.
Well, I got a bit of trouble for a tweet I posted.
I did see 70 million.
Tweet. The police have narrowed it down to 70 million suspects. By the way, I'd already established that no one had been harmed at that point. I don't take it back. I think political satire is always allowed, even at grave times.
Some people did get extremely angry.
Well, apparently lawyers are reporting me to the police.
Really?
I make a terrible cup of tea, but you're welcome to turn up.
They might have news of your stolen handbag at the same time if they
No, that man's being charged. I finally found out after it took about 8 months, but he's finally being charged after I gave them all the evidence on the third day.
Well, you should have said that he was from a hostile state. I don't buy it. This just feels to me that this is one individual with a grudge, might be backed up by some pretty extreme people behind them, but I don't feel that this is organised enough to be a sort of Russian attack. If you look at what happened to Litvinenko, what happened with Salisbury poisonings, way more thought had gone into
and Andrew
those.
Fox
They
was
were
pointing
more
out people often
organised.
work as teams when they come
Yeah,
from hostile states.
not just on your
But
own.
it's interesting that even after 24 hours of questioning this suspect, bearing in mind he's a suspect, he's not been charged with any crimes, certainly not convicted of any crime. We don't know any details about the man, or even whether or not he is British or a foreigner. That the concerns about it. That said, we have had the arrest of 5 Iranians. One of whom found in an asylum seeker hotel or hostel. I mean, with allegations of a terror attack there. I mean, the plot is thickening on this front. The plot is certainly thickening. Let's talk about the Sadiq Khan leading the sort of passive-aggressive backlash from the, I suppose you say, moderate wing of Labour of the Prime Minister's speech on Monday. He's been accused by the left, John McDonnell and others, of being like, Enoch Powell, using that phrase, that we'd become an island of strangers, but due to mass immigration if we don't do something about it. Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor, says it's not language he would use. But he also went on, and we discussed this a bit earlier, but he went on to make this bizarre claim that migrants have built London. Not true. We have a hugely large migrant population, but no, London was London before we had mass migration to this country, and certainly to London. It's absolute abject nonsense. But he also said that the average migrants on average contribute more to this country than Brits do, using completely spurious stats, which basically don't include the cost for migrants of the fact that if you're not born here and you come in your 20s or 30s, we've not had to pay to educate you, or the NHS care when you're born. And when you're born and when you die is when you cost the NHS the most, and education's a big cost. But if you're not having those, but if they stay here, they get pensions and they're allowed to benefits, and they have kids who go to school and things like that, they will be a cost. Those figures are just utterly nonsense. But it's not unusual for Sadiq Khan to just make up numbers, is it?
No, it really isn't. I mean, he claimed that pretty much everybody in London, and indeed Greater London bordering into Kent, was suffering from air pollution sickness and asthma rates.
Something like
through the roof.
30,000 people die every year as a result of pollution. Completely untrue.
No, he just wanted to charge more money to drive into London, because that's what he can do.
But he pointed out that air got cleaner. Air got cleaner before ULEZ, bigger zones or smaller zones. And by the way,
cars are more efficient.
The figures he gave, they're from I think a BMA document, but actually it was an extrapolation, and they used extrapolation, and so did the media when they reported it. It's basically the equivalent of 30,000 lives. So basically, millions and millions of people might, from living in a city or living anywhere in the modern world and having things like electricity and cars and trains and planes and refrigerators and hospitals and all of those things, they might live basically a week or two less than they might otherwise have lived, apart from the fact that those things are the things that keep us alive and make life worthwhile.
Exactly.
Would you give up your fridge and all public transport and hospital treatment in return for an extra 2 weeks? I don't think you would, guys.
Not really.
So again, this stuff is all political nonsense.
Of course it is. And he has form with this. But it is quite interesting that Keir Starmer has managed to irritate absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
With
it's
one
fun, though, isn't it?
Monday morning sermon. And I watched it. I am that person.
Did you manage to? We didn't. We played a clip and it was about 40 seconds long, and I genuinely had to sort of wake up everyone afterwards. Come on.
There were a lot of swear words, which is the topic of the morning, but there were a lot of swear words in my household.
Just tuned in, one of my producers has set up, for no good reason at all, a swear box, and I'm already off air. I'm already quite poor now.
Yes. It's a good job they didn't know about Monday morning when I was in the living room.
I'd love to have seen that. You should do Gogglebox, you watching Keir Starmer speeches.
I was also watching it with the husband, who is obviously a natural supporter of Sir Keir Starmer.
Your husband?
And pointing at him and laughing.
Your husband is Nigel Nelson, who is political editor of a left-wing tabloid.
Indeed.
Who came to a Christmas party I had, to which you were invited, plus ones. I've known Nigel for years.
Yeah.
And what did he wear to the Christmas party? Bearing in mind the sort of people who are likely to be at my Christmas party.
Yeah, a flak jacket.
Literally wore a flak jacket.
It's a top photograph for that one.
I love him for that. Everyone's going, why is he wearing a flak jacket? I went, look at you all. Of course he's wearing a flak jacket.
He was the token lefty in the room. But the speech was just, A, it was dull, B, it said nothing particularly important, interesting and necessary. I don't know why he did it at 8:30 on a Monday morning, and I think the Speaker is absolutely doing his pieces, because again, this was all announced before the House of Commons had time to look at it.
The Speaker's not doing very well in the news, though, because people are constantly criticising him for his freebie this, freebie that, trip there, trip that, taking things.
People will always criticise
You work for the Deputy Speaker.
Yes.
Does she get freebies?
Not that I know of. She certainly doesn't pass them down to me. Any freebies that you get, especially from visiting dignitaries, you have to register in the correct way. And you can't turn around to an ambassador and say, no, sorry, ambassador,
but
please
you
take
register,
your
but do you
Ferrero
get
Rocher.
to keep it?
Yes, you do. You have to register it. You have to, you keep it. You can't turn gifts down. You can't turn them away. It's the diplomacy side of life means that you have to accept these things.
Okay, just so we know. Can we talk about Peter Sullivan? We're going to be talking to a former prisoner himself in a few moments' time. Peter Sullivan, this man who's 68 years old, jailed at the age of 30. Jailed for life for the murder of Diane Sindel, who's beaten to death. Absolutely horrific crime. Basically, he's not guilty. His appeal court quashed his conviction after 38 years behind bars. He's believed to be the longest-serving victim of miscarriage of justice. Follows, of course, the case of Andrew Malkinson, who's cleared of rape in 2023 when DNA identified another suspect. He spent 17 years behind bars. There are going to be miscarriages of justice. Yeah. One of the reasons why I don't agree with the death penalty, because there will be mistakes that are made. We know that technology involving DNA has massively moved on. We also know that juries have been told in the past, and I think still being told now, that DNA evidence is far more, foolproof. It's 99.99999%. Yeah. It simply isn't that safe. And if that's the only evidence, that's not necessarily good enough to convict someone, again, beyond reasonable doubt. But once there are question marks about a conviction, we've got the big case at the moment with Lucy Letby. We need our judicial processes to work so much more quickly, do we not? Because our system is based on the principle that it is better for 9 guilty men to walk free than for one to lose his freedom, to falsely be found guilty, and to lose 38 years of your adult life is just beyond awful.
And the wheels of the judiciary just turn incredibly slowly, and that needs to change. And I think successive governments have never quite got the hang of dealing with a judicial system that works for people. If you're talking this Peter Sullivan, 38 years for something he didn't do, and he maintained his innocence all of that time, never changed. Why is it that 10 years ago there were questions over how stable this conviction was, and now he's only just been exonerated? And you think, but in that 10 years, why is it taken that long? And I think that has to change. We are looking at the judicial system that doesn't work in any way.
In any way. So we'll talk to a former prisoner about that. But again, there were a lot of years when, he did appeal after appeal. He first tried to challenge his conviction in 2008. Diane Sindel was beaten to death in 1986. The Criminal Cases Review Commission declined to refer the case to the Court of Appeal. And then before he lost his own appeal bid in 2019, he asked the Commission again to refer his case in 2021. And they then found that DNA samples did not match him. But I feel the same way about the Lucy Letby case. I'm pretty sure, on the evidence that was presented to the jury in 2 different cases, that she did murder 7 babies and was involved in the attempted murder of 7 others, and possibly more. There are other cases going forward. She's convicted. The juries that heard the case, certainly the one that had huge numbers of cases, they found her not guilty on a number of them. They found they couldn't come to agreement on others. It was a very long trial. They heard specific evidence. The detective investigating these cases, they were only involved in 1 case each. There's loads of evidence that was never challenged by Lucy Letby's lawyers. I was very sure about that conviction. Certainly, we talked about it on air and in copy. When the first question marks were raised about her by Peter Hitchens and David Davis and others, frankly, I'm a little bit sceptical. There have been sufficient issues now raised about the evidence. I think there's, beyond doubt, there should be some sort of review of the process. But I don't mean necessarily that there'll be a different outcome, but surely we need to be sure that this young woman is guilty.
And I agree with you. I was pretty convinced at the beginning that the process had been correct and she was jailed for the crime she was guilty of. But
I think if she wasn't a young, attractive blonde woman, there's lots of these people wouldn't be interested. I'm thinking. So, no, I'm serious.
Highly cynical.
Some cases are more celebrity fired.
Yes. No, I do.
There's a word there somewhere.
Yes. She has turned into that kind of cool celeb, which...
That's it.
See, I can come up with words occasionally.
Thanks, better than...
But I do worry that we spend so much time deciding whether or not to look into it that we are going to be in another case, as in with Peter Sullivan 10 years later, we might find that she was in a similar position. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but if we don't know, then exactly, if enough questions being raised about some of the evidence given by consultants, one of the bits of evidence was she was, the consultant walks in, she was just standing by the baby monitor, she hadn't called for help, when actually wrote an email that's now been discovered before that saying that she had called for help. Well, that's a bit of a game changer in that case, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's one I would rule out. So, but again, how awful for the parents. Yeah. Any of the parents involved in this, it's bad enough that you've lost a child. To have your case being discussed like this is just appalling. It must just be terrible. I do want to talk about assisted dying. Scottish MPs voted yesterday, MSPs voted yesterday, to the first stage of allowing assisted dying in Scotland. We've got on Friday the assisted dying bill coming back to the Commons for a vote. This is the one that Kim Leadbeater has brought in. There have been huge changes to that bill since MPs gave its support to go to the committee stage, crucially taking out the requirement to have a judge, a High Court judge, sit on the case. Now, there were practicalities involved in that. There weren't enough High Court judges. Basically, would clog up the court's fees. Basically, for all intents and purposes, people who've got 6 months to live will be long dead by the time any of their cases came to court and a High Court judge could look into it. There needs to be a practical way to do it. Now, I'm very much in principle in favour of assisted dying. I would like it for myself, for my family. Some members more than others, and I know a lot of people who feel that way. A lot of doctors in particular who feel that way. We've had like the British Medical Association. They're now they're down in two minds. British Psychiatric Association. They're saying they're opposed to this bill. Mind you, they also think that trans women are women and that you should give puberty blockers to kids. So I'm not sure we trust them on many issues. Frankly, I mean, I'm sorry, that does rather undermine them. But a lot of MPs being really concerned that actually this bill is now unrecognisable. Yeah. As someone who has for years supported an assisted dying law, I would not support this law as it stands. Do you think it may well go through though?
No, I don't. I think that it is so fundamentally different to the bill that was presented to MPs that a lot of people are in the similar position. Whichever side of the fence that they came into the debate on, most people are now going, hang on a second. The safeguards aren't there. The safeguards aren't there. You've got the Royal College of Psychiatrists, they have their own issues, but they're pulling their support for it, and you just see it fading away, the support. And I think that Kim Leadbeater has done herself no favours by trying to browbeat MPs into supporting it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of the stories we're talking about. 0344 499 1000. We'll get your messages and your calls coming up in just a few moments. You can text the word talk and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate. Love to hear from you, whether it's Sadiq Khan on migration, whether it's Gary Lineker posting the usual anti-Semitic propaganda. Why net zero? We didn't get to that so far in this half hour. Won't be cutting your energy bills. Not me saying that, but I've been saying it for years. But it's the boss of British Gas. He might know what he's talking about since he sends out all those energy bills to so many of us. Love to hear your thoughts on assisted dying and indeed this awful case of this murder conviction overturned after 38 years. All of that very, very welcome. Some breaking news for you. In the last couple of moments, it's been announced from the Crown Prosecution Service that no criminal charges are to be brought against the former Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe. There were claims made by the party chairman, Zia Youssef, that he had made verbal threats towards the party's chairman. No criminal charges are to be brought. That was all brought back. That was last December, I think, that it all emerged in the last few months. But of course, big falling out between Rupert Lowe and the figures in the Reform Party, and went down from 5 MPs to 4, now back to 5 with Sarah Pouchin turning up, winning the Runcorn by-election. But no charges will be brought against Rupert Lowe, the former Reform UK MP. Right now, though, it is time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football. Yes, of course, it's the Champions League final. We're also putting £5 grand in your pocket to spend however you want. Take a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive $5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
And of course, do have a good luck in that competition. Don't miss out. It's an incredible giveaway from our colleagues at TalkSport. I'm not allowed to enter, but if you want to take me, I'm very happy to come along with you. Anyway, 11:24 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. We'll get to your calls and your messages up next. This is Talk.
I put it in writing, and they basically replied and said, we can't remove him out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It was a joint case for the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Just a reminder that breaking news that the former Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe will not be facing any charges. He's accused, of course, by the Reform chairman Zia Youssef of making violent threats against him. That dates back to, I think, last December. But that is those his charges will not. The investigation will not be going forward. He's been cleared of making any threats against the party chairman after a Metropolitan Police investigation into the Great Yarmouth MP. Keep you posted on that. First up, let's get to some of your calls. In fact, actually, Mark is in Lincolnshire. He's given us a call, 0344 499 1000, reacting to that breaking news I gave you just before the break. And Mark, you want to react to that news about Rupert Lowe?
Indeed, yes. It's come as no surprise to me because anybody with a brain knew that this was all fabricated.
Well, you're basically accusing the Reform chairman, Zia Youssef, of lying.
Yeah.
You think he made it up?
Yes, I do. In this day and age, there is no reason whatsoever that the police wouldn't charge him. If they could charge the guy, they would charge him. We all know that. When you've got people being charged with, tweets, if he's saying the kind of things that they've alleged he said to the...
Did we ever actually get details on what was... And it was these threats of physical violence against Zia Youssef. We're told on at least 2 occasions, December 2024 and February 2025. The Crown Prosecution Service say, by the way, this is a very quick investigation by the CPS. They say he will not be charged with any wrongdoing and the criminal investigation has been dropped. A lot of this could... again, wasn't there, I don't know. He's not guilty of anything. Could it be people's different interpretation of language? He's clearly not committed a crime.
Well, it depends your motivation, doesn't it? Why they did this, why they came forward with this. Because at the time, if you remember, some of this, I believe, originally was going back to like December or something. And they've left it at least 4 or 5 months before they even went to the police, before they reported it, which was all... It was all the timing, wasn't it? Rupert Lowe had done the article.
There was a lot of stuff about the timing. There was criticism from Rupert Lowe and praise for Rupert Lowe from Elon Musk, and it was all supposed to be about that. But in fact, the complaints against Rupert Lowe from staff, they had already been looked at months earlier.
One thing I do know, Julia, with all of this, is there was at one point, which I believe it will still be the case, Rupert Lowe, this is how ridiculous this got. This is how intrusive and invasive this whole thing was meant to be, as far as I'm concerned, which makes it so sinister, in my opinion. Rupert Lowe, given where he lives and everything, he's a legal owner of guns. He had those taken off him based on these allegations.
Yeah.
And that stain on somebody's character is really, really difficult to understand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But he's quite clearly, he is guilty of any wrongdoing. There are no charges. They don't believe he's done anything wrong. I think it's really important to stress that. I think one thing when we talk about British values a lot, innocent until proven guilty, I have to remind people of these things all the time. But people should be aware of it. Again, it's very murky. The whole thing is very murky, and I don't think anyone has come out of any of this on any side looking good.
Can I mention one other thing to you?
Yes.
Well, I was actually going to
very
read
briefly.
About this anyway. Sadiq Khan, with his Immigrants Built Britain stuff, yeah? Here's just a quick little statistical fact. 1981, the white British population of the UK was 95.4%.
Mm-hmm.
In 2021, it's 74.4%.
Mm-hmm.
So come on, really, Sadiq, do better, you know.
Exactly. It's just nonsense. Again, and when we only mention of colour is simply because that was the white native population, because people were white, we're Celts, we're Anglos. Thank you very much indeed for that, Mark. Charlotte's on the line. She's given us a call as well on 0783. Why am I reading out my own mobile number? What am I like? 0344 499 1000. It's only a bit of it. It's no use to you. 0344 499 1000. So Charlotte, you want to talk about Gary Lineker, don't you?
Yeah, I do, yeah. It's purely because I know that there's a sort of massive uproar relating to a post he put on Instagram recently.
Yeah.
I've recently been at the centre of a massive Twitter storm myself for actually opposite reasons.
Oh, yeah.
Due to a post, I recently released a novel, and I put a post on there saying I was unhappy about a 3-star review, which seemed to got an awful lot more attention than I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Or certainly expecting. And somebody who didn't like that decided to trawl all my historic Twitter posts.
Oh, there.
And found one
Offence archaeology.
a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was, not necessarily putting forward a view on the Palestinian war. It purely stated some definitions, and I was basically clarifying what the definition of genocide was.
Yes.
And stated that in Israel it wasn't genocide.
Yeah.
As a result of that particular post, it was spread amongst the mass of the pro-Palestinian lobby, who then decided to pile on me, and I have since experienced a massive boom of horrible reviews on all my books.
Oh, what a surprise! Yeah.
And I've been called a Zionist.
Baby killer? Have you had baby killer yet?
I'm not sure if a baby killer. But,
well, you need to up your game, Charlotte. You need to up your game.
I wrote a blog post about it, but there's some lovely highlights of some of the lovely things people said about me.
So you've been at the centre of that sort of thing. But it's almost the opposite thing. But like Gary Lineker retweeting the Palestine lobby, but with a rat emoji, clear anti-Semitic trope that's been used throughout the ages. He's critical of Suella Braverman talking about just dealing with migration and saying it's 1930s Germany's language. But then he's using anti-Semitic tropes that were used in 1930s Germany. He's banged to rights, isn't he?
Exactly. It just seems that people like himself can get away with posting stuff online which are on the opposite end of the spectrum to what I posted, and completely get away with it to a large extent. I post something that's not even necessarily especially sort of controversial, it's actually just stating facts. And all of a sudden I've got a massive bunch of haters piling on me, trying to destroy all my
and no one does anything about that. Very, very good point. I have to leave it there, Charlotte, but I so appreciate your call. Good luck with the novel. Thank you very much indeed. By the way, one person who definitely doesn't want Gary Lineker, because you're still yapping on all these topics he knows nothing about, is BBC Director General Tim Davie. He's giving a speech right now in which is, and try not to spill your tea or anything while you hear this. He's vowed to tackle Britain's crisis of trust. I know. God bless him. Good luck with that, Tim. 11:34 is the time. Up next, well, a crisis of trust in our justice system after the extraordinary 38-year-long miscarriage of justice that left Peter Sullivan behind bars for a murder he did not convict. We'll talk about that with former prisoner himself, David Shipley, up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 11:36 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Claire Pearsall still with us, former Conservative government advisor. Just let you know, just another statement we've had in relation to Rupert Lowe. CPS have announced that there will be no charges brought against him. He's been cleared of any wrongdoing after his allegation that he made verbal threats of violence towards the use of the Reform chairman back earlier in the earlier this year. Rupert Lowe's now issued a statement saying he's accused Nigel Farage's Reform UK of trying to weaponise, in his words, the criminal justice system against me. And no doubt this one is going to keep on running. No longer Reform MP, of course, sitting as an independent. Right now, let's talk about the case of Peter Sullivan. He is the man who 38 years ago was convicted of the horrific violent murder of Diane Sindel, a 21-year-old woman who was beaten to death in 1986. There was DNA evidence to say he was the man responsible. He always protested his innocence. Again and again, he sought to appeal his conviction. It first tried to challenge it in 2008. The Criminal Cases Review Commission declined to refer the case to the Court of Appeal. He lost his own appeal bid back in 2019. He asked again for his case to be referred in 2021. At that point, it's when they found that DNA samples did not match his. There were new developments in DNA technology. He has now been freed. His conviction was quashed yesterday in an extraordinarily sort of mundane appeal court announcement. A man who has spent 38 years behind bars, he's now 68 years old, has been freed after spending all that time behind bars for a crime he never, ever committed. He says he's not bitter, but he has talked about the pain of being stripped of his youth. Well, let's talk about this case with David Shipley. He's a former prisoner himself, is now a writer and researcher on prison and justice issues. A very good morning to you, David. Thank you for joining us. And of course, I mean, this is an outrageous miscarriage of justice. He's believed to be the UK's longest-serving victim of a miscarriage of justice. This after the case of Andrew Malkinson, cleared of rape back in 2023, where DNA identified another suspect after he spent 17 years behind bars. First of all, how common do you believe this is? Are there a huge number of cases that are where we have people who are behind bars for crimes they simply did not commit?
I don't think so. I think most people in prison are there because they have guilty of. But what we do see in cases like Peter's is appalling mishandling of this by the police. If you look back at what happened, they interviewed this man who was described as very vulnerable. A psychologist said that if he was interviewed today by the police, he'd have to have an appropriate adult there as well as a lawyer. The police didn't give him any of that. They interviewed him without a lawyer, refused to let him have a lawyer. Essentially, it seems, bullied a confession out of him. And that was actually, even though this was the 80s, and you might think it was the era of sort of, ashes to ashes, even then, this was illegal because the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act had changed how they were supposed to be doing interviews. So he shouldn't have been interviewed like this in 86 and 87, but he was.
Why then? I mean, again, the DNA evidence, the ability to sort of read DNA evidence, to analyse it, has massively improved again. And we know for many years juries have been told, oh, there's DNA evidence, that's incontrovertible, tick, tick, job done, he's guilty. That's not the case. There's big question marks about a lot of DNA evidence. We know as things change, these cases sometimes are falling apart. But why then, when his first challenge went to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the body that gets to decide whether there's enough to, again, this relates to the Lucy Letby case now, ongoing, why then did they not say, yeah, this case needs to be referred to Court of Appeal, we need to look at this again, because clearly, A, B and C shouldn't have happened, and that would make this conviction unsafe?
That's a really good question. I think one the CCRC needs to answer. And we saw this actually with Malkinson. They took a long time to act. And it's interesting you mentioned Lucy Letby. One of the similarities between Peter's case and Lucy's is that Peter was also convicted on the basis of expert witness evidence. A dental expert said that the bite marks on the victim's body could only have been made by Peter's teeth. We now know that was complete nonsense. And there is this tendency in prosecutions to rely on expert evidence, which this is absolutely certain. Then it's clearly shown not to be. And I think the CCRC maybe need to be a bit more open to revisiting cases.
Yeah. I'm thinking, I've sat on a jury a couple of years ago and the first time, and I was really impressed with how much care and thought people on the jury put into listening, taking in the case and making the decision that was made. And I was really impressed that I had renewed faith in the justice system at the point at which it comes to court. But I'm thinking, if I was in a court, even as a journalist with the experience I've got covering these sort of cases, and I was told there's DNA evidence saying he was there, semen samples or whatever, at the scene of this, or something like that. That there's an expert witness saying the bite marks could only have been him. He's made a confession. I mean, what jury wouldn't convict on that basis? But when there's question marks about all aspects of that, it's the fact that we know mistakes will be made. We try and, ensure we have a system where it's beyond reasonable doubt. But that doubt can change depending on the information that comes to us. It seems to me that part of the problem is not just what the police did at that point. the failure of the court to challenge that at the time, but also every single year since, a failure to say, hold on a minute, this is an unsafe conviction, and leaving a man languishing behind bars for the best part of 4 decades while they just went, not a big deal.
I think that's it. The system is very callous sometimes. They've stolen Peter's life. He's now an old man. He's nearly 70. And what we see as well is they tend to be then very slow about paying compensation. Andrew Malkinson, who was released in 2023, still hasn't been fully compensated.
Yeah, and asking for him to pay for his room and board in prison all those years. I mean, obscene stuff.
Yeah, and I think, a moral justice system, when it makes an error like this, would apologise completely. Peter, Andrew Malkinson, these people should be taken straight to a lovely house and looked after, because we can't give them back their life.
I'd give them a Caribbean island. I mean, literally, you have everything you want the rest of your life. We've stolen so much of it. This is the thing. We have a justice system, we were discussing this earlier, we supposed to be people, if your freedom can be taken away from you, it should be beyond reasonable doubt. And we have a justice system where if it's not reasonable doubt, if it's not unreasonable, then you can't convict. And the idea is that, yes, 9 guilty men may go free, but we cannot afford to have one behind bars who is innocent. But we need to have a system that recognises that does happen and speeding up. Is the Criminal Cases Review Commission, are they part of the problem rather than what they ostensibly are, part of the solution?
I think they need to be bolder about looking at cases. I think they're often quite reluctant to reopen cases, and they maybe need to just be a little bit more open to reviewing things. I think there's a resistance, and they have a very, very...
If that's their job, that's their raison d'etre, why would they resist that?
I think that they have a very, very high bar for reopening a conviction. I think there's a sense...
There has to be clear new evidence. Someone has come forward and said, no, I did it.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. And I think there's a sense in which the justice system doesn't want to show weakness, sort of as an organisation. And the idea might be, if convictions can constantly be challenged, that might undermine justice in some way. But I disagree with that. But I think there's a culture within the Ministry of Justice, the leadership end, of trying to protect the organisation and trying to follow process rather than trying to be just and to make sure that justice is done.
Yeah, I think that's a massive issue, isn't it? In terms of getting justice done, I must ask you also about the announcement that, under government plans, looking for prisoners to be released from prison as little as a third of the way through their sentences. If they behave well, they can earn their freedom. A third of their sentence, they complete work, training, education assignments, good behaviour, etc., etc. Then they currently automatic early release 40% of the way through their sentence. I mean, for the most violent offenders, terrorists, sex offenders, they're supposed to serve their full sentence, but for years no one has served their full sentence unless they are, I don't know, throwing boiling water or stabbing prison guards. I think most people, you've been behind bars, you now research on these issues. I think most people, whether they've been a victim of crime or not, think that sentencing someone to, whether it's 1 year or 10 years, and then say you can only serve a third of it, makes an absolute mockery of a justice system. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm at the Prison Officers Association conference today, and I was just speaking to a prison officer before I came on air, and she was making exactly that point, saying that, you give someone a 10-year sentence and they only actually spend 3 years behind bars, that starts to feel ridiculous, and I think there's a challenge there. One of the ideas with offering early release for good behaviour is actually it would improve behaviour in prisons, because if prisoners know that if they stay peaceful and obedient and compliant and follow the rules and aren't violent, then they can get out earlier, that more prisoners would choose peace rather than violence. And that's today we've heard there's been an attack on a prison officer at Woodhill, so this is an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
The problem, I think, is that you need that incentive to be quite big, and currently, as you said, prisoners get out 40% of the way through. So moving that to 33% if you behave well is not a huge difference. It's maybe a matter of
shouldn't it be
months.
the other way round? And that you serve your sentence, and I would say you serve all of your sentence, but we will add on time for every time there is any violence. I mean, that would seem to me to be the obvious way of doing it. Same incentive. I'm just saying bit stick rather than carrot. I think it's a lie to tell a victim of justice, victim of crime, that someone's been sentenced. We do this, 10 years for this person, but they're not serving 10 years. It's a lie.
Yeah, and I think that is confusing, and people don't like it. I think there's an argument you probably want carrot and stick to get the best outcome. But I think they were originally talking about mimicking the Texas model. Under the Texas model, the assumption is you will do your full sentence, and then you have to pass a parole board to be released. And if you behave badly, the parole board will continue to hold up your release. But if you behave really well and you do all the right things, you can get an earlier parole hearing. That, I think, has strong carrot and stick.
But again, also
drives better behaviour.
Doing the education and the training, it has to be actually be available, not you be not locked in your cell for 23 hours a day. David Shipley, I hope you'll come on the show again. So appreciate you joining us from that conference. Former prisoner himself, now a writer on prisoner justice issues. Thank you for that. Claire Pearsall, former Conservative government advisor, you were at the Home Office. I know you don't deal with prisons and criminal justice, but it's very much tied in, isn't it? Because you guys were dealing with the policing end of things. Yeah. But people have had enough of this nonsense.
Well, they have, and I don't blame them. You want criminals to be put in prison for the good of us all and to complete their sentence.
And is it a deterrent?
Absolutely is. And I do think we need to look more at education and what 100%. We do in prisons.
We need to spend more on it.
Yeah, we do. And I think that's where people then start to go, really, do we have to? And it's like, yeah, because if you don't want these people to reoffend, you actually need to give them a reason not to.
It will save more money in the long run.
It will do.
Again, absolutely, yeah. Again, you put more into families and schools, you wouldn't see them, community policing, you wouldn't see them behind bars in the first place. 11:48 is the time. Love to hear your thoughts on this too. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Up next, we're going to talk about Trump's Middle East tour with Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas UK. This is Talk.
We know that over the past 3 years he's been on countless foreign jet-setting luxury trips around the world at our expense. He says it's to foster relations with foreign countries and to tell them how wrong Russia was to invade Ukraine. I'm not sure what that has got to do with the Speaker, but there you are. He spent about £300,000 over the last 3 years going on these luxury trips.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. Just to reiterate, actually, something that our last guest, David Shipley, said. There are now reports of another attack on a prison officer, this at the high-security HMP Woodhill. And certainly those who seem to be aware of it say that the details are disturbing in terms of this attack on a prison officer. It is only a matter of time before a prison officer dies in one of these attacks. We had Hashim Abedi throwing boiling oil and stabbing two prison officers and a third also injured. We had boiling water allegedly thrown by Axel Cabana, the Southport killer, earlier this week on a prison officer as well. He's always in high security jails as well. You often wonder how these people are able to get hold of the weapons. Boiling water, boiling oil, and able to fashion a knife. These are weapons behind bars. Absolutely horrific stories, Claire.
Yeah, no, they really are. And you just think, where is it going to end? And I think you're right. It's going to be with the death of a prison officer who don't deserve that kind of treatment.
I don't know who would do that job now. I really don't.
For not very much money either.
Yeah,
I mean, we don't pay them enough for this.
Absolutely. Right, let's turn our attention right now to what is going on in the Middle East. Donald Trump is on a whistle-stop tour of the Middle East after he hailed a golden age of the Middle East, urging nations in the region to abandon conflict and embrace prosperity in partnership with the US, no doubt, and also in partnership with the Trump Towers and hotels. He said it was led by the example of his host in Saudi Arabia. He is meeting the new leader of Syria. This is Ahmed al-Shara, former al-Qaeda member, of course, and militant Islamist that many people seem to think is now the new messiah, but it actually has a horrific history of violence, before he heads on to Qatar. Let's talk about all of this with Greg Spencer. He's chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Very good morning to you, Greg.
Good morning, Julia.
Lovely to talk to you. I mean, whistle-stop tour in Middle East. Bizarrely, though, not any point going to Israel. Why not?
Yeah, I think he's got that in mind. Maybe he even surprises us and makes a stop on the way back from the Gulf. But I do think that his commitment to Israel is not questioned at all. I don't know why there's this talk, currently that, it's a snub to Netanyahu. He's done this trip before. He went to Saudi for his first foreign visit in 2017 in his first term. He's making a commitment. He talked about the Abraham Accords in his speech. I don't know how he could be more deliberate in talking.
And for those who don't know, the Abraham Accords is basically the sort of the normalizations of diplomatic relations between Arab states and Israel. And again, Saudi Arabia were expected to sign up to that just days before we saw that at the massacre on October the 7th, which was one of the reasons why that date was chosen.
Yeah, I think, the first 2 years of the Biden administration, the White House would not permit any staffers to use the term Abraham Accords. It was forbidden. It was like Orwellian in a way, that they could not use that term in conversation or in memos or in emails, because they didn't want to give Donald Trump credit for
something that was actually a really significant thing. Well, we had the president over in Saudi Arabia. Again, let's all just pretend that the Saudi king is a normal person and not a murderous dictator, which is what he actually is, signing a I read it, I thought, is this true? A $600 billion deal involving arms as well, but also accepting a plane worth $400 million to be used as Air Force One from the Qataris. We have to do business with the leaders of other countries, even whether we like them or not. And a lot of other countries are not democratic. We don't get to choose who those leaders are. But should he be accepting planes to be used by for the official transport for the American president from a country like Qatar, which we all pretend they're an ally, but they're also busy harbouring the leaders of pretty much every terrorist organisation in the Middle East?
Yeah, they're trying to play broker, peace broker in a way, which is ironic given that they were harboring Hamas. So there's a gray area here. And I think the president has to be careful because, obviously he can't accept a gift personally, but if it's a gift from country to country and they use Air Force One, as the president's plane, okay, fine. It's a bit of a distraction given all.
That's a bit of a security risk, surely.
Yeah, of course. That's something to think about too. Who's bugged the plane? Yeah, there's a security risk. There's a lot of hurdles to this. So I think in many ways, given how many successes the president has had just in the last week, the last 5 or 6 days, starting last Thursday with the U.S.-UK trade deal, and then a great weekend of diplomacy. It's a bit of a distraction. I think the president's kind of trolling in a way. He made the comment, just take the gift. Someone gives you a putt on the golf course, you just take it. I think it's a little bit of a distraction at this point. Okay. But I think generally he's had a really constructive trip so far.
Well, by the way, I have to correct myself. It's $142 billion. I know the $600 billion, I think it's the future benefits or something to both countries are being talked about. What do you make of the president, though, meeting, we understand, with the new Syrian leader, ending sanctions on Syria? And this at the same time as he does make an ultimatum to Iran. There's an awful lot going on. Right. Steve Witkoff, his golf buddy and supposed, envoy on these issues, doesn't know where Crimea is in Ukraine. Doesn't even know the history at all, it would appear, but also apparently helping in terms of Middle East peace as well. Are we convinced that either Donald Trump or his peace envoy know enough about what is going on in both of these regions to be able to make any big change?
I think the president, like many conservatives, we like to bring in the private sector balance to government. We don't like to use necessarily. I'm not saying that all career people are useless, but we do have a bloated government with career bureaucrats. And so I think bringing in private sector intelligence is always a good idea.
A property developer who doesn't necessarily know anything about anything.
He's been working with the president for a generation or two. He's been the president's lawyer. He's worked on property developments with the president.
I'm sure he has, but that doesn't mean he knows anything about either Ukraine, Russia, or the Middle East.
Sure, yeah, and there's time for using career diplomats that have intimate knowledge of a particular region, and there's time to bring in fresh blood and a fresh face that can negotiate and get things done. So I don't know him personally, but he's not afraid to think differently and think outside of the box.
No, and I'm all in favour of that. And he does shake things up and gets people's attention. There's no doubt that visit has led to the release of the Israeli-American hostage, last remaining one.
And we have a proud history of working with our former enemies. Look what we did for Germany and Japan after the war, and I think that's where Syria wants to be. And I'm not suggesting that this is a good guy that's leading the country, nor would I have suggested that the Emperor of Japan was a good guy during World War II. But we still want peace, and I think the president has really embraced that.
And there is a very strong argument that, when countries are not struggling financially and economically, that you're more likely to get peace. You're not going to see those sort of uprisings. Very interesting to talk to you, Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you. Brief word from Claire Pistol on that.
Yeah, I think it is really quite interesting because when you look at what's going on in Syria, that needs to stop. That really does. And let's hope that the former ISIS, Al-Qaeda mercenary
is going to be better.
Despite
that massacre just a few months ago. But small point worth making. So much more to talk about. Coming up, we're going to take the latest headlines, and we are going to listen into the first few minutes, certainly, of PMQs. Hear what Kemi Baden, the Tory leader, asked the Prime Minister about, and we'll have some analysis from Claire and from Paul Richards, former Labour Party Special Advisor. This is Talk.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips in Leeds, it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us curry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10 pence, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12.60. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks ago.
How much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I really appreciate you joining me, whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, whether you're watching on YouTube or your connected device. It's great to have your company. In just a couple of seconds, we're going to go live to the House of Commons, where Keir Starmer is taking questions. Expecting that first question from Kemi Badenoch. Thought we'd take it live, seeing what she's going to go on. Is it going to be immigration? One of the other big topics of the day. Plenty to go on. Certainly plenty of other topics as well. Coming up, we'll get analysis of what we hear from both Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Government Advisor, joining me all the way through the show, and also former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards as well. So let's go straight to the House of Commons right now.
If I may, Mr. Speaker, Sir Roy Stone served 13 chief whips and prime ministers from Margaret Thatcher to Boris Johnson, and I'd like to pay tribute to his extraordinary service and send my best wishes to his family. And also, before we start, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say to the Prime Minister how horrified I was to hear about the attack on his family home. It is completely unacceptable, and I think I speak for the whole House when I say that this wasn't just an attack on him, but on all of us and on our democracy. Yesterday, we learned that unemployment is up 10% since the election. Why does the Prime Minister think unemployment is rising on his watch?
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Roy Stone as well and the service that was given us in various capacities. Can I thank her for her words about the attacks on me and my family and the kind messages from many others in the last few days. She did actually message me pretty well straight away, and I really do appreciate that, and she's absolutely right that this is an attack on all of us, on democracy and the values that we stand for. Mr. Speaker, she comes here every week to talk the country down. We've got 200,000 new jobs, record investment, 4 interest rates cut. Contrast that to the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget, inflation through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole.
I'm not sure the Prime Minister even knew that unemployment was up, but there's no point him blaming everyone else. The fact is, Conservatives reduced the deficit every year until the pandemic, more than doubled the personal allowance. We left 4 million extra jobs, tackled the post-pandemic inflation spike, and left the fastest-growing economy in the G7. Let's talk about what is happening today. Let's look at Beales, a 180-year-old department store in Dorset. They survived 2 world wars and the winter of discontent, but they couldn't survive this Labour government. Beales is having, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, a Rachel Reeves closing down sale. What does the Prime Minister have to say to all the people who have lost their jobs?
Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see job losses, but she must be the only person left in the country who thinks the economy was booming after the last government. We've created new jobs, record investment, trade deals that they tried. The India deal, I think they tried for 8 years and failed. We did that deal. They talked about a US deal. We did that deal. We tend to get a stronger relationship with the EU. The former trade minister must be the only former trade minister who's against all trade deals which boost our economy. She says she's against the India deal, even though it's got the same provisions she put on the table. She's against the US deal, even though it saves thousands of jobs in car manufacturing. And, Mr. Speaker, most absurdly, she says she's going to rip up the EU deal when she hasn't even seen what's on the page. They're reduced to a brain rot. A once great political party is sliding into brain-dead oblivion.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome his tiny tariff deal, but the fact is, it has put us in a worse position than we were in March. He should not over-egg the pudding. Let's talk about how things are getting worse now. In every month of this year, household names like Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda and Santander have cut staff. The ONS estimates that there are 100,000 fewer jobs than a year ago. And this was before his jobs tax, which will make things worse. Can the Prime Minister promise the House that by this time next year, unemployment will be lower than it is today?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I think she just said a tiny tariff deal. Can I suggest that she gets the train to Solihull, yes, exactly. 2 hours, goes to speak to the workforce at JLR, their families, their communities, to tell them she would rip up the deal that protects their jobs, And when she's done that, she might travel across to Scunthorpe and tell the steelworkers there she's going to rip up the deal that saves their jobs. And then if she's got time, go up to Scotland and talk to the whisky distilleries. Tell them she'd rip up the deal that's creating 1,200 jobs for them, boosting their exports, and then come back here next week and tell us what reaction she got.
So I didn't hear a promise to get unemployment down, and that's because he knows things are going to get worse. And this goes wider than businesses. Last week, I met staff and patients at Farley Hospice. They do fantastic work, but they need to find an additional £250,000 to pay the jobs tax. How does he suggest Farley Hospice, a charity which relies on donations, pays for his tax hike?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have provided £100 million boosting for the sector, and Children and Young Person Hospitals received £26 million funding this year. But, Mr. Speaker, she turns up every week to cart from the sidelines. But what she doesn't do, she moans about what we had to do in the budget to stabilise the economy. But she hasn't got the courage to stand there and say that she would reverse the next decisions that we take. And I know why. It's because she doesn't want to say she's against the £26 billion investment in our NHS. She doesn't want to say she's against the £1.2 billion more for our police. She doesn't want to say she's against the £3.2 billion more for our schools. All the time she doesn't have the courage of her convictions. It shows that her criticism is totally confected.
Mr. Speaker, I can't believe the Prime Minister is still using this figure. We had this very conversation at the dispatch box. He knows it is just capital spending. It's either he's not paying attention or he is saying things to disguise what is going on. That money will not pay for the jobs tax. He knows that, and the hospices know it too. And the other people who know that things are getting worse are the 5 leading business groups in the UK. They say that his so-called employment rights bill will be deeply damaging to growth. Does the Prime Minister accept that they are right, or does he believe that he knows better than business?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Tories. Every time better rights for workers are on the table, they vote against them. Respect and dignity and protection at work are good for workers, good for the economy, and good for growth.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to listen to business. You cannot have employment rights without employment. Labour always forgets that it is not government that creates growth, it is business that creates growth. And businesses are closing, and they are blaming him and his Chancellor. There are 100,000 fewer jobs, Mr. Speaker. Hospices, charities, nurseries, they are facing bills from the jobs tax that they cannot afford. Even the unions say workers are being thrown on the scrap heap. And all of this before his unemployment bill makes hiring even more expensive. When will he admit that Labour isn't working?
Mr. Speaker, she says we should listen to... She should listen to business.
I will have the last...
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, she should listen to business. They're in favour of our trade deals. The India deal. Fantastic deal. Tariffs on cars cut to 10%. Whisky and gin, tariffs halved. £4.8 billion into our economy. What does she say she'd do with the India deal? She wants to rip it up. The US deal that saves thousands upon thousands of jobs. What does she want to do? She wants to rip it up. The EU deal, good for our economy. She's not going to even wait to see what it says. She absurdly says she's going to rip it up. It is so unserious. She even was reduced last week to calling the Indian government, accusing them of fake news. No wonder she did so badly as a Trade Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the project for them is over. They're sliding into oblivion. They're a dead party walking.
Right, well, that was an exchange. 6 questions, of course, that Kemi Badenoch, as Tory leader, the official leader of the opposition, gets. We don't normally take it live. I thought she may well go on immigration, one of the big issues, but she basically led on unemployment and the risk to jobs from various different Labour measures since they've come to power and their plans said they've got it. It's very interesting. I mean, we've got Claire Pearson to talk about this, former Conservative government advisor, Paul Richards down the line, former Labour Party special advisor. Come to you, Claire, first. Started off, as we often have with niceties, her talking about her being, and quite rightly horrified by that attack on Keir Starmer's family home, saying it's an attack on all of us as MPs, but also an attack on our democracy. He thanked her for that. She'd obviously been in contact privately, obviously. Straight in then, both of them pretty going for it, hammer and tongs. I don't feel there's any love lost between these two. But it was all about unemployment going up, 100,000 fewer jobs, nothing that the government is doing is helping, it's all hurting. Did those 6 questions, did she land a finger on him?
The message is strong because there are problems with the jobs tax and employers having to shed employees.
They're all
because
valid
of
points.
This. They are all valid points. It just doesn't have that hard-hitting effect. And to ask 4 or 5 questions in a row on the same thing, it didn't achieve anything. She does need to pivot a little bit more and start to divvy up the questions a little bit better. She could have mentioned immigration. She could have mentioned reducing prison sentences. Those would have been good ones to put around the employment figures. Then you can package it up and say all of these things don't work. Don't stick to one subject.
OK, very interesting. Paul Richards watching that as well, former Labour Party Special Advisor. Thanks so much for joining us, by the way, Paul. What did you make of both Kemi's questions and indeed Keir Starmer's responses?
Well, I thought it was pretty astonishing that, given the big news of the week, that the thing that really has got everyone talking is the announcement on immigration. And yet this was the dog that didn't bark, isn't it? You know, she decided to ignore it completely. And maybe that was because she knows that it's actually quite good for Labour that we're getting tough on immigration. Anyway, she chose not to.
I think she did the same thing last week. I remember we were expecting her to go on whatever the big topic was last week, and she went on something completely different. I mean, it's quite good at, you can kind of sort of wrong foot a Prime Minister like that by not being predictable, but there's also an element where your backbench MPs, your party members, your voters, the audience will say, why are you not talking about the big topic of the day?
Well, that's the danger. She looks out of touch in that way. I mean, she talked about jobs, and I don't know if you heard it, Julia, but then somebody from the backbenches of the Labour Party shouted, well, you'll be out of one soon.
Ouch.
And so it did rather open up to attacks on jobs. And so she went on the economy, she went on jobs. I don't think that really is quite, the calibration of that was wrong, I think. I think it's not what people are necessarily talking about.
Although it is a big impact on people.
Well, of course it is.
That is the reality. And as she said, you can't have employment rights if you haven't got employment. And it's a fair point.
Yeah, she had some good lines. She also echoed her sort of inner Thatcher when she said Labour isn't working. Yeah. That was famously the big poster in 79, wasn't it? So she was trying to echo some of that, perhaps for an older audience. However, as usual, she had an open goal and she tripped up before she even kicked the football,
That's interesting. I mean, Claire Bissell, I think you and I are intrinsically quite big fans of Kemi Badenoch on a lot of different issues, and I like her as a person, but she is not making that sort of that connection. I mean, she was really strong on trans issues, and again. And she feels really passionate about that, but she doesn't seem to be hitting home. And I mean, but then does any of that matter? Because I mean, I remember I was a political journalist sitting in the chamber when William Hague was doing an absolute brilliant job. He was winning P&Qs hands down everywhere. Everyone was laughing, these clever, witty jokes. He was doing so well. Well, how does that work out when you actually get to the next election? Does any of this really matter?
Outside of the chamber of the House of Commons and people like us, probably not. It really doesn't. This is half an hour of theatre.
And you lot watching and listening. She means you too.
It's half an hour of theatre. It is one of those things. You get to see the personalities of MPs standing up and asking questions. That is about it. I think it's slightly disappointing that she wasn't going in stronger on some of the subjects that she is better at, and that she needs to work on. But again, also, just to pull Paul up on the joke about Kemi and no job, I found it quite interesting that Keir Starmer was urging her to go to Solihull, to Jaguar Land Rover, when he couldn't get the address of that correct last week, and he was sending everybody to Coventry.
The journalists who were supposed to question were actually all sent somewhere, Coventry. They was quite literally sent to Coventry. Paul Richards, coming back to you. I suppose the same question, really. Does any of this really matter? Because I've never really thought that Keir Starmer is a great performer. I mean, I do find him, genuine. I could fall asleep through any of his speeches, and every now and then you just go when you go, oh, well done, that was good. Certainly had this big speech on Monday, massive big speech, but again, even if he delivered it well, no one believed a word he said, and the people who did were very angry with him on the left of his party. But how much does PMQs matter anymore?
I think it matters in two ways. I mean, of course, most people are at work right now. They're not necessarily watching Prime Minister's questions religiously like we do. But on the other hand, right, two ways it matters. One is there's a social media clip that will now be amplified from both parties, and that'll be sent out to millions of people on their phones who will just see a sort of 10, 15 seconder to reinforce a message that they want. So there's that much bigger audience will see it. And the second way is the impact on the mood of their respective parties. I mean, Labour MPs have been largely a bit miffed this week with some of the language in the immigration speech. It wasn't aimed at them, obviously. And Kemi's backbenchers are concerned about the lack of progress that she's been making.
Indeed.
And,
so it could be shoring up.
Tone,
it could be shoring up support. You mentioned the social media clip, and I was thinking, people will see, 20 seconds, 30 seconds on the 6 o'clock news. I'm struggling to think which bit they use. I think they probably end up talking about being horrified by the attack on the family home, rather than any of those issues. In terms of going back to the big story of the week so far in British domestic politics, which has been that immigration a white paper. Lots of criticism of the Prime Minister from his own side. Well, I mean, such as John McDonnell and Zora Sultana Oz on his own side. They're suspended from the Labour Party. Comparisons with Enoch Powell. But we have had the likes of Sadiq Khan, the Welsh Labour leader as well. But Sadiq Khan in particular, basically saying there's not the language he would use, talking about the phrase that we risk turning into an island of strangers. How damaging is that, and how much do you think it was something that Number 10 and Keir Starmer knew would happen, prepared for, and felt was worth the criticism from the left, and indeed from people like Sadiq Khan, to try and appeal to a wider range of voters, particularly in those red wall seats that were just considered to be Labour through and through until Boris Johnson, and have gone back to Labour, but only by a small margin?
Well, I mean, I was in Parliament this week, actually, and there were a lot of MPs beyond the usual suspects you described who were a bit disgruntled by the language, not publicly, but they privately sort of didn't like the echoes of Powell and so on. Well, they didn't like the sort of othering and the sort of the Powellite
othering.
But
people who aren't from here are other. I mean, like we talk about the French, they're not British, therefore they're the other, aren't they?
But the point I was going to make was that as soon as they saw the opinion polls and the bump in the opinion polls and how the language actually has played out really positively, not just Reform and Conservative voters, but also Liberal Democrat and Labour voters, I think they're going to shut up. So, it was a speech not aimed at Labour MPs or Labour members. Aimed beyond that, and it seems to be playing quite well.
That is a very good point. Again, very much supported, as we would have expected to be, because it's not a far-right view to be concerned about mass uncontrolled illegal immigration. Again, that also goes for welfare reform. That's another thing. I mean, Labour MP was talking about, he's actually been shouted at in the street regularly about particularly things like, the winter fuel allowance and things like that. But welfare reform, Claire, is something that everyone knows that you can't like cut the number of people coming from abroad to do jobs like social care, low-paid jobs. We say low skill. It's a massively important job, but you don't need 10 years of training to do it. That's what we mean by low skill. It's not pejorative. It's just a factual thing. But you're not going to be able to get Brits to do that unless you A, raise the wages, and B, make sure they can't be claiming benefits and welfare. So the welfare reforms would also be very popular, but again, also something lots of Labour MPs are opposed to.
Because it's been handled very, very badly. And I think it's a consistent theme from this government that the communications around a policy are so bad. At the moment, we're freezing Granny at Christmas. The welfare reforms look to be set to affect those with
disabled
disabilities.
People,
And you've hit farmers, so no farmers, no food. So you're looking at it going, but these are distinct groups of people. And then they go out, no, it's not quite like that. You've lost the message.
Communication seems to be a big issue. Now, we are expecting Nigel Farage, actually, Reform UK leaders. We think he's going to have a question in the next few moments. We'll go to that live as soon as he gets on his feet. But Paul, until then, Paul Richards, again, is a lot of the problems that Downing Street has had, are they communication problems? Are they issues with what's going on in terms of the Number 10 machine and his advisors, as opposed to the actual policies?
Well, I'm reluctant to criticise my former colleagues, but it does feel like that, doesn't it? It feels like the sequencing is strange. The pension has gone up but nobody's talking about that. They're only talking about winter fuel allowance. Some of the announcements around disability benefits and so on just seemed unnecessarily mean, and a lot of it does sort of aggregate to this view that, who are we going to annoy tomorrow? So I think there is a little bit of that where we think, okay, we've done the tough stuff. It might be time to start build up the coalition now and get some supporters on side with some positive news for people.
Yes.
And it could be, it could be things that sort of done the sector specific. I mean, think about the great big trade deals. It'll take a while for those to be felt, really.
Unless you're in the steel industry or the car industry, there's very significant jobs. They're very important in those areas. But most of us don't work.
That's what Starmer was saying. Scunthorpe and Solihull and Scotland for the whisky. He was making those points, and I think that will be felt in those sectors, of course. And the fall in interest rates too helps homeowners with mortgages. So we've had that 4 months in a row now. So there are, there's good news, but we don't hear about that so much, do we? I mean, maybe it was ever thus. We know governments always struggle to get the positive news out there because people would rather talk about the negatives.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the stuff that people feel is actually impacting them, and that's the thing. And again, we have announcements about unemployment. We have announcements about sentencing for prisoners, but people actually perhaps only having to serve only a third of their sentence. Another topic which Kemi Badenoch could have gone on, but again, I suppose every single topic that Kemi Badenoch wants to go on. Oh, actually, apologies. We're going to go back to the chamber because Nigel Farage is on his feet.
Alive and kicking. Very much enjoyed your speech on Monday. You seem to be learning a very great deal from us. But can I encourage you, please, to go further as a matter of national security? As a matter of national security. Over the weekend, an illegal immigrant from Iran, who we believe came by boat, was arrested in the north of England on serious charges of terrorism. Since the speech on Monday, 1,000 young, undocumented young males have crossed the English Channel. Does the Prime Minister agree now is the time to declare the situation in the English Channel as a national security emergency?
It wasn't my speech, it was the Prime Minister's.
Mr. Speaker, the situation is serious. The last government lost control of the borders. We are taking powers. The Borders Bill, precisely to his point, the Borders Bill is the first bill to give terrorism-like powers to law enforcement, precisely so that we can get in before the crimes are committed, before people get to this country. That's right. This is the most far-reaching provision ever for law enforcement to defend and secure our borders. And that's why it is extraordinary that he, of all people, voted against it. And sooner or later he's going to have to explain it.
Amanda Martin.
Right. Well, that was a question and answer from Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer. We just come back to you, Paul Richards. I was just going to say, one of the issues that Kemi Badenoch has, of course, is that everything she raises, Keir Starmer can say, well, you lot were in power for 14 years, this is why this is a problem, whatever it is. And on the immigration issue, that's an issue. Nigel Farage basically joking and laughing, yeah, but you're basically listening to us. But he makes a very fair point, doesn't he? That 1,000 more people arriving illegally on Channel dinghies, so far this week alone, because of the calm weather. He says the Prime Minister should declare a national emergency in the Channel. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting for Farage because if he does force the government their hand on issues, and if Labour sort of comes up with this ever increasingly tough policy measures, what does he do? Does he criticise the government for not going far enough, or does he say, this is down to me and I'm really running the show? And today he decided to sort of take the credit for it and say they're learning from us. But a national emergency, well, it is a national emergency. Whether declaring it as such, I don't know what that means really. So that was just a bit of rhetoric.
I think there's more action that can be taken. Claire Pearsall, final word to you on this?
Oh, well, I think we have to have a moment of agreement there, Paul and I, because I don't think that the words making it a national emergency means anything. If you're not going to do anything, and they're already
treating the gangs as if they say as if they're terrorists.
They're toughening up parts of the Borders Bill, but they're also relaxing a lot of other parts like age verification and a route to citizenship. So they give on one hand, take with the other.
OK, thank you very much. Big thanks to Claire, also to Paul Richards. Thank you for joining us, former Labour Party Special Advisor, watching the News. We try to get the best bits for you rather than the whole darn thing, because we like you so much. 12:26 is the time. We'll get to your calls in just a couple of moments, your reaction, your thoughts on what was said. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
we know that over the past 3 years he's been on countless foreign jet-setting luxury trips around the world at our expense. He says it's to, foster relations with foreign countries and to tell them how wrong Russia was to invade Ukraine. I'm not sure what that has got to do with the Speaker, but there you are. He spent about £300,000 over the last 3 years going on these luxury trips.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Afternoon, welcome back to the show. 12:28 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is indeed Talk. You've all been getting in touch with, us about a lot of the big stories that we've been talking about. Your texts and tweets. Wanted to leave it very open. A lot of you getting in touch about what Keir Starmer had to say and what Sadiq Khan has had to say about immigration. Graham says, our island is full of strangers, I'm afraid. Khan is wrong and Starmer is right. Dylan says, Khan, Lineker and Ed Miliband are all disgraces in their own unique ways. David says, not sure what Khan doesn't understand. We're already an island of strangers. You just need to go to some of our big cities like London and Birmingham. Sarah says, on Khan's comments, he sums up the problem with Whitehall's politicians. They need to get a grip on reality. Look at what they've done over the past 20 years to our country. Jacqueline says, I get so angry about this statement that immigrants built this country. What immigrants and what they built. What immigrants and what did they build? What immigrants? Sorry. Punctuation is your friend, people. What immigrants and what did they build, she asks? Because let's be honest, the Romans and Vikings gave us a lot, but it's not these historical Europeans that the likes of Khan are talking about when they're on about modern immigrants. And truthfully, Julia, what did they build? Stuart says Keir will do nothing on immigration. His promises are for after the next election. So like all his previous pre-election promises, it's just words to get elected and ignored. Afterwards, a lot of you being very critical of Gary Lineker. Humphrey says Gary Lineker is a disgrace after this post that everyone's basically saying is an anti-Semitic trope. Lineker is a disgrace, he should be sacked. Nigel says Lineker will pay a huge price one day. His days at the BBC are numbered. And others making that same point. Let's go to the phone lines, and 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Calls are charged at the national rate, but I have to say she's an old favourite, and I say favourite, and also no. Georgina is on the line in London, reacting to PMQs as well. Georgina, I could speak to you every day, and I think I almost do these days. How are you?
Darling, I'm great, looking fabulous as always, and you are right, I am old. I've been
we all are, my darling, we all are. What did you make of PMQs? We don't normally take it live, but we thought for a second time we'd have a go. I'm not sure it was the most scintillating listen, but it's worth hearing these exchanges, isn't it?
Well, it is worth hearing the exchanges, but I find myself wanting to be there arguing with that man.
Yes.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Kemi should be firing topics at him like a machine gun. She hasn't got the fire. She hasn't got that passion for her choice of topics. She needs to be at him, reiterate her.
But she was, when she did on the trans stuff, you know that she felt that in her core. That was absolutely her topic. But you're not, all her points were very valid. All of them very valid, but as you say, no fire in her belly.
Exactly, and it shows, Julia. You know, you've got to get up there to make the Prime Minister either falter in his answer or give one of his legendary deflection tactics, and then you have him banter right, keep at him.
I always wonder with the point of PMQs, because you want to get a gotcha, you want to get a media clip, you want to get a gotcha, but there's also an element where, I mean, you know, Prime Ministers, none of them pretty much don't answer questions, in which case you're trying to make your own point. But I say, I'm thinking, what would I clip if I'm sitting there, the BBC editor, and I've got to do a clip for the 6 o'clock news? I'm not quite sure what I'd use.
Well, I would not let that man off the hook. You've got to make Keir Starmer apprehensive to stand in front of his pulpit.
And he isn't. He isn't, is he?
No, he isn't. He will get up because he knows he can talk around and get out of the questions. That would not happen. He needs someone strong who's going to keep at him.
Yeah, that's true. Georgina... I'm going to have to leave it there. They're nagging me. I've got to go to a break. Georgina, thank you as always. Talk to you every day. I absolutely love it. Thank you very much. Honestly, I'd love to see Georgina in the comments box, wouldn't you, Claire? She's brilliant.
Amazing. She really would, and she'd
knows
give
her
the
stuff
fight
as
back.
well. She knows her stuff.
Yeah, this is what we need. More people like that.
Problem is, Keir Starmer can. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to fly with voters, but he can keep saying, "Well, you look at the Tories. This is what you do."
Not long.
I think voters have had enough already.
Yeah.
Certainly after a year, people are going to go, "Okay, and now what? You
yeah.
promised change again." Not quite sure it was change people actually wanted, but there we are. Anyway, right now it is time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football. I'm talking, of course, about the Champions League final. We're also putting £5,000 in your pocket to spend however you want. Have a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Do not miss out on that incredible giveaway from our colleagues at Talk Sport. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to talk about what apparently is the golden age of medicine. Yeah, fat jabs are basically the cure-all for every single thing. We thought it was digital ID cards. That's what Tony Blair thinks of everything. But apparently it's the fat jabs. But is it? We're also going to be talking about that assisted dying vote in Scotland and what could happen in the vote in the Commons here on Friday. This is Talk, Home of Common Sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, Home of Common Sense, to me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:37 is the time, just the last sort of 20 minutes or so of my show before Ian Collins is here to tell us what's happening with him. Claire Bisler's still here as well. Now we're joined by Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust Chairman. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. I want to talk first with you about, the golden age of medicine. That's what we're being told we are now in. Thanks to the weight loss drugs like Wegovy and Mounjaro, we're told they can clear, not only they deal with obesity, it's pretty much everything else as well. We're told they can now delay diseases associated with ageing, halve deaths from heart attacks, according to the latest research. Everyone's saying, look, these are the drugs that everyone should be on. I simply don't trust that a drug that, or any of these different versions, there are three or four or five kinds of drugs being which have been developed by different pharmaceutical companies. I just simply do not trust that these drugs are the side effect free, completely safe, brilliant working drugs that the pharmaceutical companies that are set to make billions upon billions from are necessarily as good or indeed as safe as they say. Am I just being cynical?
No, I think that's a very practical view, and I think it's the view that a lot of people take. But I think it is also true that we are in the sort of foothills of a new approach to pharmaceutical products. The way they connect with receptors inside our body that can change the response that they get to some of these drugs. And I think it is pretty early, really, to look at what the fat reducing drugs can do.
Well, especially if they've only been around. I know we've only kind of heard of them the last couple of years, but they've been doing tests for, best part of a decade. But even so, you can't see what the long-term impact is on ageing from a drug you've only known about for less than a decade.
No, I think that's right. When you're talking about aging, how do you do clinical trials on aging? You'd have to do them for 30 or 40 years, maybe 50 years, 60 years, who knows? So we don't know. Some of this, I suppose, is what they call clinical forecasting. But there is no doubt about it. I mean, if you look, I went to the Crick Institute just recently and had a look at what they're doing with gene editing and stuff like that. And, they can actually change the way your body works and the receptors of your body so that you don't have these long-term illnesses. People that are born with long-term chronic conditions, there is the prospect now of them being their genes being changed and not having these problems. And as I say, we're in the foothills of this now with these new drugs. And of course, it's a big bonus for government, isn't it? Because if you look at these fat-reducing drugs, look, why do we get fat? Well, we have the wrong diet. And the product and the food industry makes the wrong stuff. So for the government to take
and we don't show self-control. And it's way cheaper than it used to be.
The point is this. My point is this: that the government don't want to take us on as individuals and say you're only fat because you're a fool, and the government they won't take on the food industry because of the financial impact of that. And so if suddenly some magic drug comes out of nowhere, which is cheap, they say, well, we'll fund that. We don't have to have a row with anybody.
And that's the thing. I haven't had an issue with the statins thing. This idea of people who need statins, and they'll let everyone on statins for 10, 20 years, as opposed to saying, look, maybe you should make changes in your lifestyle. Well, that actually not only would mean you had less risk of high blood pressure and cholesterol or whatever it is, but you'll also have a happier, longer life. You'll feel better as well. I think we're kind of forgetting a lot of those things that go along with eating healthily and exercising, your bone density, all of those things that matter.
Julia, these public health messages, they don't work. The only public health messages that work are changes in the law. Smoking in the workplace, seat belts in cars, crash helmets on motorbikes. It's the law that changes our behaviour.
No, vaping. Vaping had the biggest single impact in terms of people giving up smoking, and that wasn't a change in the law, although they're trying to stop people from vaping.
That's just an alternative stupid habit, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not as stupid as smoking. It's much safer. It's not 100% safe, but it's a lot safer.
Now that they've put limits on the disposable ones, that's made a reduction in the number of people who are vaping. So it is the law that primarily. If you look at George Osborne, all those years ago when he introduced the sugar levy on fizzy drinks. Yeah. Said to the industry, if you want to carry on making fizzy drinks with loads of sugar, that's fine. I'm going to tax them. If you don't, I won't.
It hasn't had any impact on obesity.
Within, I mean, one drink isn't going to change the obesity. But the point, my point. The point I'm making is this: that it changed the industry's formulation within 6 months, and
an awful lot of people stopped buying a lot of products like Iron Brew and Lucozade things because actually they were no longer the products they wanted. I mean, diet drinks sell more than, I think Diet Coke sells more than Coke now in Western European nations. Things, for goodness sake. So if people want to buy a fizzy drink that's healthy, well, not healthy. Well, you can have water. That's healthy. You can buy a dietary. If you want to buy one that's high sugar, have one that's high sugar. I don't see it's why anyone else's business. But
you see what a palaver we get into discussing this, and how much easier it's going to be for the government to say, eat what you like, drink what you like.
Well, you say that, but that's the thing. That's all on the proviso. And again, this idea that everybody should get them on the NHS, get these jabs, even if it just tackles obesity, that alone will be. And they've even said people who don't lose weight, they can still have a lot of these good impacts. But again, even the studies carried out by the companies themselves, and these pills, these jabs work in slightly different ways. They have slightly different success rates. Okay, 70% of people losing weight is a good thing, but not everyone loses weight. There are a lot of very unpleasant side effects for people, people feeling nauseous and the like as well. But actually, the evidence is very, very clear. I mean, the amount people can lose, roughly 10%, well, fine. But if you're 20 stone, if you're really overweight and you're 20 stone, you lose 10%, that's the equivalent of £0.5 £1 a week. You could easily lose £0.5 £1 a week if you're 20 stone. By the time, I mean, you just miss one meal a week and you'd lose £0.5 £1 a week. This is nonsense stuff. But also, the moment you stop taking it, the evidence is very clear that you actually put the weight back on and then some, like all faddy diets unless you've changed your lifestyle. And that's why the pension companies and the actuaries and stuff, they are not changing their payouts because they know it's not going to have the impact everyone is claiming it's actually going to have. Always follow the money on these things. They know what they're talking about. These are not the miracle cures that everyone is claiming they are.
Do you know, I took part in a programme a couple of days ago about childhood obesity. And do you know, it's costing us $66 billion a year. Childhood obesity in the full...
$66 billion a year?
No, in the full life cost. Because what you are at 6 years old is what you're likely to be for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So the whole of life cost of kids being obese is horrendous.
And that'll be their lifelong health costs, and presumably also failure to get to work.
It's a complicated formula.
I'm going to guess that figure is largely made up because these figures usually are, but most of the figures relating to obesity and NHS costs are made up.
I think it was Imperial College.
Yeah, Imperial College have got quite a lot of form on this. Yeah, on lots of figures. But anyway, carry on.
From me to take on Imperial College. Okay, what's your next question?
No, but you're saying that there is a cost. I mean, again, that's a parenting issue. If your 6-year-old is overweight, you're a bad parent. Let's tackle the actual issue. Genuinely, if you're walking down the street with a fat kid, people should look at you and as if you'd just given your child a cigarette.
It's highly likely that if you've got obese children, the family will be obese as well.
Yeah, it's very likely. Although I know people who are slim with fat children.
There's a very, very strong correlation between deprivation and the geography of deprivation. You can almost plot it on a map. In fact, you can plot it on a map.
But it's not because they're so poor they can't afford food.
It
is inadequate, hopeless people who can't manage parenting, who also are probably poor because they're not working, they're not functioning. There's a whole load of things, but it fundamentally comes down to, I mean, you know, I don't know why everyone else needs to get involved, and I don't want the kids put on the jabs, that's for sure. Can I get to you on one other question though? Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, people are talking about, like, you know, what would happen if Nigel Farage, a former UK leader, did become Prime Minister? So some of those polls have shown that it could happen in the next few years. And he's claimed that Nigel Farage wants to scrap free healthcare. I mean, again, this is a lie. He doesn't. He's talking about us moving towards a healthcare system like pretty much the whole of the Western world has, where you have social insurance, where actually people, and it's not, by the way, it's not free healthcare. We pay for taxes. But he says he'd rather tax the rich more rather than bring insurance into the NHS. Do you think Wes Streeting's right about that?
Well, look, I always, my answer to that is you've got to pay for it somehow. You can take your taxes out of your right-hand pocket, and you can take your insurance premiums out of your left-hand pocket, but they're still your trousers. You've got to pay some way or other. So, you know, I'm kind of neutral on that. I have actually done programs with Nigel Farage. He's never said to me that he wanted to change any the way he's been accused of it. But of course, at the moment, Nigel Farage is running Labour's home and affairs policy.
There is that.
We should pay attention.
That's very interesting. Always good to talk to you, Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust Chairman. Ken Pearce will come in on whatever you want to come in on there.
I think the fat jabs thing is really, really interesting because it is personal responsibility. People need to look at their own lifestyle. You can take the jabs all you like. The minute you stop doing it, if you've made no changes, you are just going to weigh the same again.
I would live on nothing but McDonald's, kebabs and pizza if it was up to me. Genuinely, but I choose not to.
Exactly. You know, chucking a massive bag of crisps
so
for me and
hungry
a couple of tubes of Pringles, and I'm job done.
She's your girl.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if anybody doesn't want their jabs, you know, send them my way. I'll have that. I want to make my own life
I know
easier.
so many people are on. So many people. It's extraordinary. But there we are. Again, I don't know why you can't afford your own, because if you can afford all the food, you can afford to have your fat jab. Same view I have on people getting nicotine patches and things on the NHS. If you can afford the fags, you can afford that. There we are. 12:48 is the time. Up next, going to talk to Lib Dem MP Christine Jardine, who's a co-signatory to Kim Leadbeater's bill to bring in assisted dying here in England. We've got a vote coming up on Friday in the House of Commons on that, after lots of changes have been made in the committee stage, but this after MSPs in Scotland backed controversial legislation in a landmark vote yesterday. Talk about that up next. This is Talk.
We know that over the past 3 years he's been on countless foreign jet-setting luxury trips around the world at our expense. He says it's to, foster relations with foreign countries and to tell them how wrong Russia was to invade Ukraine. I'm not sure what that has got to do with the Speaker, but there you are. He spent about £300,000 over the last 3 years going on these luxury trips.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you so much for joining me. 12:51 is the time, and we've actually saved one of the most important topics actually this week for the final few moments of the show. We're joined right now by Christine Jardine. She's a Liberal Democrat MP to talk about, well, not just a vote in Scottish Parliament yesterday, but a vote coming up in the Commons on Friday related to assisted dying. A very good afternoon to you, Christine.
Afternoon, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. Well, we had this vote from MSPs yesterday, basically a landmark vote. They voted by 70 votes to 56 to basically allow a bill that's called the Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland Bill to clear its first parliamentary hurdle at Holyrood. We'll see where that goes in the future. But we've also got this vote at the House of Commons for England in terms of the bill to bring in assisted dying here, which has been brought in as a private member's bill by the Labour MP Kim Leadbeater. You're a co-signatory to that bill. I'm in a very difficult quandary on this, and I think a lot of MPs are. And it would turn out, we've got doctors who've reported today, they're kind of completely mixed on this. The Royal College of Psychiatrists, they're unhappy about the bill. I have been for many years, and I'm a huge proponent of people having the right to assisted dying. I would go further than Kim Leadbeater and you in this bill. I would want it for people who have just basically an unbearable quality of life, not just if they have believed to be only 6 months to live. However, the bill as it stands is not a bill I would vote for if I were an MP, certainly after taking out that the safeguards, particularly of things like a High Court judge, making sure that people had not been coerced or under pressure. Why do you think that this bill is still worth voting for?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that that is taken out a safeguard. What they have done with that is they examined the proposed bill line by line, and they spoke to experts and witnesses. And what the legal witnesses said was that the way it was set up with a High Court judge was not the best way to do it, that's not what a High Court judge's expertise is. So they've brought in a panel whose expertise helps the situation, will look at, the person's personal circumstances, spot any kind of coercion. They've improved the safeguard. They've made it a panel of people overseen by a High Court
Well,
judge.
you say that, but this will be equivalent
I
of...
I don't say that lightly, Julia, because I did actually go and ask, because I wanted to know why it had been changed. And I've spoken to Kim about this, and I've spoken to everybody on the committee, and they all say that the reason that they did it was they listened to the advice and they were told that this would make it strong.
OK, and the advice was in particular the fact that the courts would be frozen up. There aren't that many High Court judges. There'll be... No, that was one of the reasons. It was simply not...
The whole reason,
it wasn't the only reason, but it was one of the reasons. It was totally impractical. And just with people who have 6 months to live, frankly, they'd all be dead by the time their case came to court. However, if you have a panel of people... it's like an abortion clinic. Would someone be working in an abortion clinic who's morally or practically opposed to assisted dying? No, of course not. The people on the panel would be people who think, yes, this is something that is a valid choice. Now, we know in other countries, and one of the reasons I thought the bill originally was a good idea was all these extra safeguards, but we know in other countries there has been a slippery slope, and more people who are not getting good end-of-life care, and that's not changing anytime soon. People who are poor, people who are lonely, people who feel they're a burden on their family, they are opting for assisted suicide rather than other options. That's got to be a concern, surely.
That is why the bill is framed the way it is, why it's only terminal adults with a terminal diagnosis. Because in countries where that legislation has been introduced, that sort of legislation, places like Australia, Oregon recently, and the United States, those countries, there is no expansion of the definition. I know the countries you're talking about. You're talking about Canada, Benelux. That was a different law. That did do what you actually said that you would be in favour of. It's about, more than a terminal illness, quality of life, and then it gets expanded. No, this bill has been very, very carefully and tightly framed so that on the face of the bill, it says terminally ill adults. And that is so that it can be kept to terminally ill adults, to reassure people who are concerned about what's been termed the slippery slope, about people with disabilities who I completely understand why they're concerned, but it's why, for me and for Kim and everybody else involved in this, it's vitally important that they have the reassurance of knowing that this bill is only and can only ever be about people with a terminal diagnosis. And even then, they have to go through all sorts of safeguards. And one of the curious things and reassuring things for me is that what all the research in all the countries who have laws like this, and this will be the strongest of its type, all of the safeguards which have already been built in and the amendments which are proposed, which we'll be discussing over the next few Fridays, will make it the strongest in the world. And in those circumstances, where people get the go-ahead, they get approval, if you like, for assisted dying, they go through all the steps that they will have to go through, they speak to all the experts, they go before the panel, all of that. They don't all take it up, because one of the biggest things, and Liam MacArthur spoke about this so movingly yesterday, a constituent of his who'd gone to him, the anxiety, the fear that people who have a terminal diagnosis go through, the thought of what, not death itself, but what they may have to go through before they die, is horrifying. And the constituent that he had spoken to, and it was incredibly moving, had pleaded with him and said that removing that anxiety would make whatever time they had left better. Now,
but because they knew they had that choice. And it's certainly a choice I and my family want for ourselves. But again, I just so worry about some of the safeguards. I know we should talk about this at greater length, and I know you've got that vote coming back, the bill coming back on Friday, and no doubt this will continue to be debated by MPs and indeed by the public as well. Really appreciate you joining us. Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP, co-signatory of that assisted dying bill in England, Kim Leadbeater's bill. Where are you on this, Claire Pearsall?
I'm really, really uncomfortable. I think it's been changed so much that I support people's right, but it's not what was originally put in front of MPs, and I don't think the safeguards are there.
There's that concern. It's like, well, I want it for me and my family, but I worry about other people. And then is that absolute patronising attitude people might have there?
No, I don't think so. I think you're well within your rights. You've got to have safeguards around these things.
Okay, Claire, thank you very much indeed. Ian Collins is here. Pay attention. Get off your phone. Honestly, it's like get off your phone at the kitchen table.
This is research.
Oh, you're starting some research for your show at 1 o'clock?
You've got to start somewhere, haven't you, in this industry? And I always think, why not today?
It's more prep than he normally does, to be fair.
Why not today? Absolutely. We're going to pick up on that assisted dying story, because when something compromises you, and look, in our job, Julia, we're not meant to go, I'm not sure. We're meant to have very robust opinions. This is one where you kind of go, do you know what, I really...
Well, I started off, as I said, wanting this bill to go further, and 100%. Now I'm like, no, I just think you've got to look at the slippery slope. And again, you're talking about very, very vulnerable people at a very 100%. Vulnerable time in their lives, and taking their lives. And I do worry, but I want the right myself. Definitely want the right for my husband.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Don't we all, ladies?
I'll sign that petition.
What else are you talking about? I'm not making light of it. I know it's a very serious issue.
The Rupert Lowe story is kind of interesting. I mean, it's kind of panned out as I thought it would.
Basically, there will be no...